Good morning, folks. I have to do something a bit different this time. My sleep pattern got out of whack again, so, with the time acceleration and everything throwing off my whole, I guess they call that your circadian rhythm. I think we all feel the time acceleration speeding up. A whole day feels like it's gone a whole lot faster than normal. Yeshua Messiah said in the very end days the time would speed up. Well, here we are. It's throwing off my sleep pattern evermore. So, I have quite a lot of different things to go over today. Different things relating not only to just research stuff and some interesting factoids, but I also have to address something. And, Jonah, the prophet, warned Nineveh to turn away from sin and repent, and they did. And I'm hoping that maybe I can make an appeal to those who unrightfully attacked me for what I do in helping people with my skills, my talent, my knowledge that God has bestowed upon me by using the Bible to prove them wrong, and to get them to repent because they've gone way too far. Folks, this time I'm not going to name their names. Let's just be. I'm going to go a little softball on them this time. Maybe my little kinder, gentler self. Which normally I really don't have. I'm kind of rough and tumble, but maybe my little kinder, gentler ways will work for these mamby-pamby limperists out there, these cowards that, claim to be something that they're not, that shouldn't be teaching because they're heretics and they teach heresies, lies. And it's time to rectify some of that. But I'll get to that in just a moment. So, in today's show, besides that, I'm going to discuss a little bit more about the internal conflict. I'm going to discuss some dynamics about it that, I really haven't devoted a whole lot of time to before, but it's still important to go over, nonetheless. Very important. It has to do with the types of people that'll be emerging to lead these factions, because that's absolutely going to happen. There's no question about it. And a little bit more on the dynamics involving that. Also, there's more to discuss on China. Some things that I really haven't discussed before, actually, also. So, I've got quite a show. And I might do a little bit of a different thing and try to address the audience a little bit more often than I regularly do. Sometimes I ignore the chat too long because I get tunnel vision. I get into my monologues and I get talking and I get, really deep in thought. And, I'll keep going and going and I'll forget to look at the chat and address the chat. So before I even get started with everything, I'm going to greet everybody and see how everybody's doing. Welcome everybody in, whoever made it. So let's see. Hey, Boris, great to see you. And thank you for translating that Xi Jinping billboard that's in Serbia. Thank you. Thank you. That one that they put up everywhere and the other ones. Thank you for translating that. That was great. Hi, Michael Larson. Good to see you. And Miriam, good to see you. And Toad and Wendy. Great to see you all. Thank you all for coming to my early morning show. I normally wait till the evening time, but again, my sleep's been thrown off, so I sort of have to start early, or else it'll never get done and I'd miss my Friday show. So I'm going to go ahead and do it while I'm still awake. How's everybody doing here? How's everybody doing? Let me see. What's everybody even saying? I got to push buttons. Sorry about that. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, great to see everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you too, Miriam. Thank you for coming. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and get started. So what I was saying about the, godly correction that I'm about to offer these people that unrightfully, have attacked me recently, that I found out, speaking of heresy, calling self-defense murder is not correct. That is actually a heretical thing to say, because you're saying God contradicts himself, because you're overlooking about half of the Bible when you call self-defense something that it is not. And warfare is also in the Bible. Warfare is not a quote-unquote murder fantasy. That is not correct, because if that was the case, then you're calling God something that he's not, and you should repent of it, because God had the Hebrews fight entire wars of self-defense against peoples that wanted to slaughter them, like the Canaanites, the Amalekites, all the other ites that lived in ancient Israel. So, let's talk about how this all got started. Your son took the mark of the beast. So you decided that you wanted to create your own doctrine to console yourself and make yourself feel better about that. But what does the Bible say? The Bible says that there are false doctrines, false teachers, doctrines of devils. And Matthew 10:37 says, listen carefully, Matthew 10:37 says that you cannot love your mother, your father, your daughter, or your son, more than you love Yeshua Messiah, the Father and the Holy Spirit. So there you go, So you cannot love your family members more than you love God, the Most High, Yeshua Messiah, the Holy Spirit. You cannot love them more than you love Yeshua. So, that being said, can your family members become a stumbling block? Well, of course they can. Anything can become a stumbling block that causes people to lie or fall into belief of false doctrines, or to create false doctrines that aren't true. Because what does Revelation 14:9-11 say about the mark of the beast? It speaks of eternal damnation of the mark. They will burn in the lake of fire, and the smoke of their torment will arise forever and ever in the presence of the holy angels. Revelation 14:9-11. So the mark is doing what? The mark is causing a great chasm, a great separation, a huge separation. And it's causing people who don't love God more than they love their relatives to try to create false doctrines to make it okay that their relatives took the mark, when you should never let your relatives become a stumbling block to you. Because if they took the mark, then Revelation 14:9-11 says that what's going to happen to them? They're going to go to the lake of fire. That's the end of it. That's what the word says. If you are creating a false doctrine where you say the marked can be forgiven, you are clearly speaking against the word, because the word doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. You're teaching lies, heresies. So, again, the self-defense issue. You can't speak against self-defense because it's basically half of the Bible. It's in enough of it to where it takes up a humongous portion of the word, because you shut your comments section off when you said if somebody could give you 4 examples. I have the screenshots. Somebody did give you 4 examples. I have the screenshots. Somebody did give you 4 examples before you shut your comments section down. Yeah, because you didn't want to look bad because you're prideful and you can't handle being wrong. But you were wrong. Somebody got the better of you and they proved you wrong with scripture. So you turned off your comments thread. I have the screenshots of the person proving you wrong before you had turned it off. And you turned it off at 11 p.m. that night. But you said you turned it off at 2 a.m., so you lied. You turned it off at 2 a.m. because somebody was talking bad about you. Nobody was talking bad about you, unless you're considering somebody proving you wrong talking bad about you. So let's get that straight. You can't lie. Revelation 21:8 says that God can't stand a liar. liars, cowards, dogs, like people that are doggish, that are bestial, and the unbelieving will be cast into the outer darkness. If you indulge in false doctrine, well, you can be considered then the unbelieving. And you can also be considered a liar, because if you propagate false doctrines, you're deceiving people. You're deceiving new Christians. You're deceiving gullible people. You're leading them astray. By speaking against self-defense and calling it something that it is not, it's not murder. Let's see, Leviticus 26, 7 through 8 talks about wielding a sword against your enemies. They will fall by the sword in great numbers as you pursue your enemies. Or how about Ecclesiastes 3:3? Oh, what does that say? It says there's a season for all things. There's a time to kill, a time to heal. There's a time for war and a time for peace. Oh, wow, it says there's a time for war, a time to kill. Well, what does that mean? That means that, self-defense is justified. Because how can you say it's not when King David slew Goliath to defend his fellow Hebrews? Goliath was pure evil, and all the others were scared of him. He was going to do them harm. But David stepped in, saved the day. God helped that stone go straight into Goliath's head and kill him dead. Okay, so he defended his fellow Hebrews. That's one example. Oh, another example. Let's talk about Shammah. When all the other Hebrews fled from the Philistine army forces, they sent in 600 attacking Philistines, but Shammah held his ground in the lentil field. And with God's blessing, with God's power instilled into Shammah, God allowed Shammah to defeat those incredible odds in self-defense in the lentil field. But yet you call that murder. You would call that murder because he defended himself. So in your mind, that's murder. No, God's power, you don't understand how God works. He works through people. He works through the natural, be it natural disasters, animals, like in the plagues in Egypt and other examples. He works through the people because he worked through Shammah to defeat 600 Philistines. He had the Hebrews fight an entire war of self-defense. Yet you call warning people about World War III scenarios, you call that a quote-unquote murder fantasy. Wow, man. Wow, you're way out of touch. You need to get a grip on yourself, son. Okay, so another example. Besides Shammah and King David, there was also the example of Nehemiah, building with one hand while he was armed with the other. He was rebuilding the Jerusalem wall. So was he and his entire crew, armed for self-defense in one hand, building with the other. Or how about the disciples that were armed with swords? If Yeshua was so against that, he wouldn't have had them armed. But what did he say? He said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And then what? He said, 2 is enough. 2 is enough. You can always have more, but 2's the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum. A sword is a deadly weapon. It's kind of obvious, don't you think? I mean, come on, it's a sword. It's an instrument of shedding blood. It's a sword. It's a weapon. It's a defensive weapon. Yet you think you know so much and you can teach on these things, but you know nothing. You're a heretic because you're saying that God changes and that God contradicts himself. Do you know what the legal definition of heresy is? Go look it up. Go look it up. You're a heretic and you're in dangerous waters because you're going to be accountable to God for leading people astray and for all the things you've said that are totally wrong and baseless. Baseless. You made up your own doctrines ever since your old lady's son got marked with the mark of the beast because you wanted to make yourself feel better. You wanted to find a loophole. You're no different than the Pharisees looking for legal loopholes in the law. In the law. In the Old Testament, the Pharisees, they did the same things. They tried to look for loopholes and they made up their own doctrines. You're no better than they are. You're in dangerous territory, bub. You need to repent. You need to repent. God will hold you accountable for the things you've said. You're flirting with some bad stuff, man. You really are. You really need to stop, and you really need to repent. You need to stop talking about other people. You need to stop, making self-defense out to be something that it ain't, that it's not, because the Bible is fully for it. Oh, here's another thing. The Bible speaks of, defending yourself at night. I've even mentioned this verse before. And if you end up killing a burglar in your home, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. The defender, the word defender, the key word defender, they're not guilty. They are not, N-O-T, not guilty of bloodshed. So, brother, you are all the way wrong. You are a heretic, and you need to repent of it because you're in very, very dangerous territory. You're obviously pretty new to the faith, and you don't understand your Bible. You need to stop teaching. You need to go back. You need to study the Word, and you need to stop spreading lies and heresies. It's dangerous for your own good. Stop it. Stop it. So now that that's out of the way, I really don't appreciate being talked about and slandered or libeled, even though he didn't say my name. It was obvious he was implying it was me, because I write stories about World War III, because the Bible even says that there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. So isn't it a good thing for an ex-combat soldier to use his skills and expertise and knowledge to warn other people about the horrors of war? I think so. Because God's put it on me to do so. To use my old career, my old talents, skills, abilities, knowledge, wisdom to help others so that they can survive it. Don't you know that the beast is going to make a kinetic war on the saints? It's in Revelation, and he overcomes them. He can't overcome them in a spiritual war because they belong to Yeshua Messiah. So that means the only way he could overcome them would be in a physical war. Don't you know that? Of course not, because you don't read those. You cherry-pick verses. Stop it. So, to you, I would say simply, you need to stop talking about other people. Get a grip on yourself, son. Get a grip on yourself. And go back to the Bible, study it, and you need to repent of your heresies and your lies and your false doctrines that you're spreading. Because Yeshua Messiah is not a Barney the Purple Dinosaur. He's not some limp-wristed hippie that lets people kick his ass all around the place. That's not the right Yeshua. You are not worshiping the true Yeshua. He's not coming back to give them a hug. He ain't coming back to give hugs. He's coming back to kick evil in the ass, slaughter the evil forces, and pick up the beast and the false prophet and throw them alive into the lake of fire. So, what you're doing, you're no better than these charlatans, these hirelings that work in these brick and mortar buildings that call themselves a house of God, but it's really no different than, the Pharisees who turned his father's house into a house of merchandise like these mega churches. It's disgusting. That's what drove Yeshua Messiah into a righteous fit of anger where he beat the money changers with the whip and flipped tables. Oh no, but people don't like to remember that, but that's in there too. So, with all that said, I think most people don't understand our Messiah. They don't understand him. They don't know the true Yeshua. The true Yeshua is firm. He's paternal. He's a warrior king. He's firm. He's not some fluffy hippie. No, he's firm. He's mighty. So I won't hear anything else of it because it's just getting ridiculous now. So, basically, I'm going to now that I've taken care of that, I'm sorry, y'all, I got a little really into it there. Now I'm going to talk about the other topics, okay? Like I said, I would go into the issues with China and also the issues with the internal conflict, but let me address the chat here before I start my next section, see who's all in here, and greet any new people that just came in, so see what's going on here. Yeah, hey, Mary, great to see you. And Toad, yeah, it's a shame, Toad, that people won't listen. They just won't listen because there's a separation happening. It's a real separation. You can see it. It's happening all around us. It's real. It's very real. And the mark is a big issue of contention that's causing a lot of the separation to occur. The mark, false doctrines, all of it, all of it. There's big dividing lines coming down right now. It's very, very real, very serious. But yeah, it's good. It's good to see everybody. I'm so glad everybody came. I know this is kind of unusual for me to do it so early, but I had no choice. I mean, I don't want to miss this evening because I might be asleep by then. So, but anyway, moving on. Talk about my next section here. I'm going to go ahead and talk about China here. This is interesting. Here's some factoids. Now, did you know that China has the most billionaires in the world? The mainland has 698 billionaires, but Hong Kong, which is part of China, is just given a little more autonomy, but it's part of China. Hong Kong has 71 all unto itself, 71 billionaires just in the city of Hong Kong. So, between the mainland of China and their city of Hong Kong, that's part of China, they have a grand total of 769 billionaires. We have the second most at 724. Russia, they have just under half our population, but they have quite a few. They have 117 billionaires. But China has the most at 769. 769 billionaires. India, surprisingly, now this is interesting here. India has 237 billionaires. And of course, the pan-Arab nations, all of the Arab countries combined, only have 21, which surprised me because you would think there would be a whole bunch of oil tycoons there with all this big oil money. But no, there's only 21 billionaires throughout the Arabian Peninsula, the Gulf nations, and of course the Levant, which includes Lebanon and Syria and other areas, but and Jordan and Israel's part of the Levant too, even though they're not Arabs. But that's interesting. So what does that mean? That means China's economy is massive because not only do they have the world's most billionaires, they also have the biggest middle class on Earth at 900 million. So 900 million out of their nearly 1.5 billion people are now middle class. They're now middle class. So China has the biggest middle class on Earth. They have the most billionaires on Earth. And they even have a handful of the world's trillionaires. The uber elites, like Xi Jinping and a few of the CCP regime hierarchy, the highest members of the CCP, are purported to have trillions of dollars. So, as far as Russia's concerned, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. It is alleged because the man has so many assets that people aren't even sure if this man is the richest man on Earth or not, but it's been alleged that Putin is actually the richest man on Earth. This man has enormous assets, hard assets, and soft currency assets. Putin is extremely wealthy. He's potentially the richest man on Earth. Potentially. I can't say that with a certainty, but he definitely, between him and Xi and a few of the other Chi-Com CCP elites, they rival any of the Western elite trillionaires. So I said that to say this. The billion and trillionaires that are in the East comprise this Eastern elite that I tell you all about. They're real. They're real. And they have immensely more power than the West between them. They do. Even just China by themselves. They're ginormous. Their economy is just freakishly gargantuan big. 900 million? That's like almost 3 times our whole population, and that's just their middle class. That's just their middle class. And then, of course, they have more billionaires than we do. They finally surpassed us in the billionaire count. That's a sign of massive progress on the part of China. They're not broke, folks. They have the most gold reserves on Earth. They hold 6,400 plus tons of gold. 6,400 plus tons. All they admit to is 6,400. But people have estimated that they have more, a lot more, that they've has as high as 10,000 tons of gold. Russia has 2,000 something. I had wrote it down. It's in one of my past videos where I go over the economic stats of China and Russia compared to ours. But China has the biggest industrial base on Earth and the most output. They alone, just China alone, is 35% of the world's manufacturing. 35% of the world's manufacturing is in China. They have the world's biggest industrial base, and they have the biggest military industrial complex on Earth, like I've told you all many times. So, that being said, that just goes to prove that the Eastern and Western elites are right now at a split. And that is going to be the World War III, because the East has different plans than the Western elites. The Western elites want their great reset, but they're never going to get it. Their power is going to wane because they have convinced so many people that they're untouchable, that they can't be judged, that they can escape God's judgment. They've convinced so many people that they're going to get away with everything, and they're not. They're really not. I'm going to explain to you diligently how all of that's going to work, and that's where the other aspects come in. It all begins with the collapse, because they've actually castrated their own power base so much that there's no coming back from it, and they have literally no feasible way to enforce their will on anyone. And I'm going to explain in great detail how that's the case. And I'm going to use not only my aspects of my past work, but I'm also going to use things that are going on in our reality right now all around us to explain this to you people so that you all understand how real this is. Yes, things are changing at a rapid pace, As far as what happened, I guess you could say yesterday now. As far as what happened yesterday with the death of the old hag, that's over there in the Isles, I don't know if that is, as significant as people are thinking it is. I mean, it could be, but I think its true significance is only for the West and not so much for the whole world, and I'll explain why. Because, again, there's two separate sets of elites. The Western elites do not run the whole world. You see, the people of the West have this Western-centric mindset where they think that the West owns everything and runs everything when it actually, in fact, doesn't. If they would do more research, they would see that the world is actually a more diverse place than they realize. There's other parts of the world that actually have a humongous say in how prophecy will unfold and how things are going to happen. And I've done diligent research that backs that assertion up. And I've shown it many, many times in my work. And I've explained it many, many times in my past shows. But I'm going to break it down in even greater detail as I go here. So, Chinese armed forces. Now, the installation where they unveiled the mighty power of their electronic jamming assets was at the Mumian facility, the Mumian base, which is out in their they call that like the 9-dash line. They're South China Sea bases. They're man-made islands. They have one called Mumian. Now, Mumian was where they used the electronic jamming on the two F-35s, almost causing them to crash because they came just barely within range of the frequencies that are given off by those jamming antennas. So, what that Mumian base is, it's an electronic warfare base for the whole entire South China Sea. It's also a satellite tracking facility. It's a SATCOM facility, and it's a communication center. So, what that means is that in any future invasion of Taiwan, they're going to crank that electronic warfare up to, a high power, okay? They're going to use that to the maximum extent. What they're going to do with it is they're going to shut everything down in Taiwan. They're going to make all the electronics go dark in Taiwan. So they're going to disable the Taiwanese ability to use their radars, their computers, probably shut their grid down with it too, depending on what type of frequencies they put out and what level and everything else. They got all kinds of different frequencies, and they have different ones that can do different things. Now, if you know anything about frequencies, you know that you can literally move tons of stone if you use the right frequency. You know that, because you've seen things levitated with frequencies before. I know you all have. I know you all have seen those videos where they demonstrate that you can levitate different items with frequencies. That's real. So there's different frequencies that could shut their grid off, sort of like in the same effect that happened to that Aegis-class destroyer that the Russians did in the Black Sea. 2 different times, 2014 and early 2021, when they shut off the same ship, the USS Donald Cook. They first did it with an Su-24 with a Kirkuk system on it, and they did it again with an Su-25 later. So they demonstrated that they can shut off the entire ship like a light switch. All of it. The electronics, radar, all of it. So that left it dead in the water. It was unable to respond or do anything. It would have been, completely annihilated had those ground attack aircraft actually dropped in some torpedoes or something like that, or did like dropped a munition right on the deck or something, like did a dive on it. They could have annihilated that ship. So what they're going to facility, and probably facilities on the mainland, of course, and they also have mobile vehicles that are electronic warfare weapons. In fact, I had an entire thumbnail of all the different electronic warfare assets that China has. Now, China has a very superb electronic warfare jet that's been produced in pretty big numbers as of right now. It's called the J-16D. Now, this thing, it's like an SU-37 MKK. It's like an Su-37 MKK, except it's been outfitted with AESA technology, which is in the jamming pods. And I'll explain to you what that is in just a second. But they produced over 172 of these aircraft, and counting, because they're still producing them. Now, this is one of the most advanced electronic warfare attack aircraft ever made. Now, this thing with these jamming pods can do much the same like those outfitted with the Kirkuk system, with those outfitted Su-24 and 25 that they put those pods on. Well, this thing can do much the same using this AESA technology, which AESA means that it's called Active Electronic Scanned Array. Now, the predecessor to this was called the PESA, but this is more advanced than the PESA for electronic warfare purposes. Now, what it does is it multi-fires beams, which can make the actual aircraft become invisible to radar by shutting down the radar, and it can and also it can jam radar, like air defense targets, like air defense radars. So advanced air defense systems can be jammed with this multi-role fighter jet, this electronic warfare multi-role fighter jet. So what they can do, in other words, is that when they're flying over Taiwan, these Patriot missile batteries that, like, we've sent them, they're going to shut the radars off for those. Then they're going to fire some missiles, such as the where's that? Is it a missile that they can use? Oh, yeah, the CM-103. Now, the CM-103s that these things carry is an anti-radar missile, and this thing has a 62-mile range. 62 miles. That's insanely far for an air-to-ground, weapon. So this thing will shut off the air defense radars of the Taiwanese air defenses. And they'll swoop in, fire some of these CM-103s, and those things will just destroy. They'll annihilate those systems and the batteries, that are there on the ground, and anything else like it. So these things are a massive threat, not just to the air defense systems that are ground-based, but it's also a huge threat to the Aegis-class ships. When I read up on it, because the Aegis is a very advanced electronic, it's got a lot of electronics and radar systems in it, tons of different, electronic suites in it of different types, and computer systems and targeting acquisition systems and just everything that's on those Aegis ships. They fire all kinds of missiles, everything from tomahawks to just whatever else they can load up in there. I mean, they have all kinds of different weapons on them and radars and everything else. But this J-16D is a huge threat to ships like that, though, too, because these things can become invisible to the Aegis ships, and then they can just fire those same types of missiles from a standoff range and hit those Aegis ships and just totally annihilate them in the water. So that's just one electronic warfare attack aircraft that they have that they can use. They also started recently outfitting those JH-7 ground attack aircraft, the ones I told you they have 400 of in service. That I didn't know if the other 2,000 that they'd produced. I didn't know how many were sold. I didn't know how many were warehoused. I just know that they have 400 of those, and those are now being outfitted with those same systems. So that makes them extremely deadly ground attack aircraft assets. So I said all that to say this, China is going to integrate a lot of their different electronic warfare assets along with cyber warfare, along with anti-satellite weapons like their FK-2000s. I mean, they've got satellite tracking facilities that they're already tracking all of our different satellites. They're going to shoot them all down with the FK-2000s and whatever else they have. I'm sure they got other things too that we don't know about. They're going to shoot all those down. They're going to make us blind. They're going to use a devastating cyber attack to cripple our nuclear arsenal because they already hacked solar winds. They've already got the crown jewels. They know how to shut all that off. So they're going to hack that, shut off our military network, shut off our grid, because our grid is connected to the internet, which is retarded, stupid. They don't even need to use an EMP, folks. They can use a cyber attack to shut everything off. And then later on, after they've taken over, they can turn it back on like they did in my first story. So that's just one threat. Because I wanted to talk more about electronic warfare because I haven't really just dedicated a good minute to discussing that in a while. So I wanted to talk about some of those threats. So Taiwan, being that it's extremely close to China, the Chinese electronic attack aircraft they don't even have to fly out very far from the Chinese mainland to fire those standoff missiles and hit all these different targets that have radars. You know what I'm saying? It's too easy for them. Plus, they have all their ground-based missiles. They have the biggest ground-based missile force on Earth. Their strategic missile forces, I've heard it used interchangeably, however you want to call them, that's one branch of their active military. And that is the biggest ground-based missile force on Earth. They have the most conventional missiles, plus their nuclear missiles, but they have a ton of conventional missiles. I did a video on it. I discussed that in great detail. So they can shower Taiwan with missiles and it wouldn't even be an issue, whether it's coming from their aircraft in the form of, standoff missiles, or whether they decide to just fly right over them and carpet munition them after they shut off all their radars and their targeting acquisition systems and everything else. They have so many options on the table. Taiwan will fall extremely rapidly when they do decide to do something. Now they've got their, as for their naval assets, they've already got the fourth carrier about to be released. They've been building aircraft carriers like some fools. Even though they're obsolete for power projection. Sorry, speech issues. Even though they're not really adequate for power projection anymore, and they've become obsolete in that regard, they actually are very good, though, for pushing defenses out, like your air defenses. It's pushing them out away from your coastline, meaning that if your aircraft carrier sits, maybe about 500 miles away from your coast, now you can send up aircraft 500 miles away, and they have you basically pushed air bases out away from your land so that nobody can get close to your land. And likewise, it works when you're about to invade somebody too, like Taiwan. You sail your carriers out past Taiwan, out into the Pacific. Now you have a way to block them from getting any sort of help. So the doctrines of aircraft carriers have been changed by China a little bit. Now they're using theirs as more of a defensive type of thing, which makes sense considering that that's one thing they actually have less of than we do. They have less carriers, but the way they deploy them makes a lot more sense, because using ours for power projection is like a suicide mission, because they have ballistic missiles that are designed to kill large capital ships. Totally destroy them. like the DF-26Bs and the DF-21Ds. And those things, especially the DF-26B, out well in excess of 1,000 miles. We're talking like 1,500 miles away from the coast for the DF-26. Now the DF-21 is more like a 1,000 mile range weapon, but the other one gets a little bit more mileage. So they have different options depending on how close in the enemy ships are, and they've tested them, and they're tried and true. They work. First, they tested them in the Gobi in the desert. And then they tested on actual ships out in the ocean, and they actually worked when they hit the moving ships. So they can calculate it using satellites, how to hit the target, and hit it correctly. So they have all these options that make aircraft carriers that we use for power projection totally obsolete. And of course, they have new submarines. They have the Type 93 nuclear attack sub, which has some of the best sonar on it, and it has, it can shoot the YJ-18 anti-ship missile, which is an insanely potent anti-ship cruise missile. And they can hold 22 torpedoes, either the electronic seeking types or the thermal seeking types of torpedoes. And it's their newest nuclear attack sub. Very quiet, very quiet. They sneak past our ships all the time, and we don't even know about it until they surface. Same with the Type 094, which the 94, that's their boomer. That's their ballistic missile sub. Now, the JL-03 ballistic missiles that they carry, they have a range of 6,200 miles. The Trident that our subs carry only has a range of 4,600 miles. Just, if you were interested in that. So our Trident 2 that we rely on has a lot less range than this JL-03 ballistic missile. So their subs can, hit us from a further distance than we could hit them. And their nuclear attack subs are extremely quiet, and those are what they use to interdict our boomers with. And then they have a new cruiser, too, a new battle cruiser. It's called the Type 055. And that thing does not have engine problems like the Zumwalt. So, I've seen a lot of Western sources that are extremely biased against China. I mean, extremely biased. Like, they don't tell the truth at all. They try to make China, out to sound like it's a novice at new technologies and new weapon systems, which is a complete, total bullshit joke, man. That's why we're going to get knocked off our ass by them, because we underestimate our enemies. We have a horrible habit of doing that. But I'm talking about, Western sources, whether it's just different, articles about these things written by, Americans, or whether it's just whatever, Western sources. And I read all kinds of sources, folks. To do real research, you have to use different sources, and I'm not talking about Googling. You got to use a real legit search engine, and you got to look at different encyclopedias. You got to look at different articles from different sources. You cross-reference the evidence that's actually overlapping to find the correct information, and then you disregard all the rest, which is bias and fluff and junk. You just throw all that out. It takes a long time to do research. To do true, adequate research, it takes a while. It takes a lot of dedication. You ain't going to do it just looking at one or two sources. You really got to overlook a lot of different things. And even another thing that helps is looking at production numbers too. You want to look at how many things are produced, where they're produced, what's in them, what are their capabilities, how many that were made, sold, stored away in storage. I mean, there's so many things and variables that change the numbers of things all the time. And, even combat losses in some cases, if certain equipment was used in a war, sometimes things are written up to loss, total loss, whether it was a combat loss or an accident or whatever. Things happen in war. So there's all different reasons why sometimes numbers of different things can change, either due to new production or due to things being retired, stored away, destroyed, whatever. There's different reasons for things. But anyways, sort of got off on a tangent there. Let me check the chat here real quick. Oh boy. Well, good morning, Josiah. Good morning, Kelly. Good morning, Romero, Boxer Mom, and Juan Munoz, and Mary Flasha, and Toad, and everybody. Boris, great to see you all. Yeah, Boris translated that Xi Jinping propaganda that's in Serbia for me. He told me what it says. It says something about, everybody needs a bust of Xi Jinping. What a bust is, like a statue of just their head. That's crazy. That's so crazy. Yeah, Boris speaks Serbian, so he told me what that said. That's just crazy, man. All this Xi Jinping propaganda everywhere. It's like Saddam Hussein in South Park type of obnoxious. Like when Saddam would like put up all his stuff when he would take a place over in that cartoon. I used to watch that when I was young. Yeah, I don't watch that, needless to say, anymore. But yeah, it was funny growing up. But yeah, anyways, now moving on from all of that, what else did I need to talk about in regards to China? Well, no, for now, I'll stop there. And now I'm going to go into something else. Now I'm going to talk about, like I said, how the power of these elites will wane. Don't people know that the wicked will be judged? All the wicked will be judged eventually, but the wicked of the West will go first because they have a nasty, nasty habit of continuing the old ways, which is why Babylon gets destroyed before any other nation. Because this is spiritually Sodom and Egypt, folks. These Western elites are they're conducting the old ways of witchcraft and sorcery, meaning that they're sacrificing the youngsters. We abort so many youngsters, which is disgusting. So here's the thing with that. God, we once had the light of Yeshua here. And the reason why God rose up heathen nations like China to be a superpower was to punish the West for its wickedness, for turning its back on Yeshua. That's why China, this evil POS, despotic police state regime that's worse than the Nazis, has been raised up to be the world's superpower, the most powerful nation that the world will have ever known by the time the world's destroyed. So they were raised up to punish the West, not just its regular people, but also its elites, its leaders. Like in Deuteronomy 28, that's just one example, like I've mentioned before, where it talks about how the ruling class, the king, and his people would go into captivity and they'd be punished. So that's not just in Deuteronomy, folks. That's all throughout the Word. There's examples of that everywhere, about the ruling class going down with the ship. They're not getting away with nothing. You see, these people think that they're going to escape perdition and judgment and everything else. They think that they're so out of it. They're so out of touch with reality. They think they're going to download their consciousness into machines to escape. That is the most obnoxious, most kooky, bizarre BS that I think I've ever heard in my entire life. What would really happen, most likely, is that they'll think they're uploading themselves into a machine, but what really happens is that they just end up, dying, and, that some AI takes over in their place, pretending to be them. That's what I think happens. I don't even think that they would really be able to do that. I think it's all a crock of BS. I don't believe it. So I think it's nonsense. But that's just my personal belief on that. I just don't think it's real, folks. I don't believe it. It's a bunch of nonsense. But, they think they're going to escape. They think they're going to get away with things. But, you see, when God judges a nation, usually the first thing that happens is there is usually a type of collapse. Now, in the case of Babylon, Jeremiah does speak of infighting. Jeremiah does speak of internal conflict before the foreign invasion even happens. So don't understand that these elites are going to lose control little by little. They're going to lose control. They cannot control 340 million people, nearly 340 million people. If you include even all the numbers of, and it has been millions that have crossed our border in the improper way, illegally, if you include all of them in the count, it is about 340. So we got 340 million people here. Close your eyes for a second and imagine how much people that is. Imagine the number of people that really is. Think about a nation that is this big with 340 million people in it. It is the third most populated nation on earth. And you mean to tell me that somehow, some way, that there's not a whole bunch of factions and leaders in the dark plotting and planning their own schemes? No way. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. That's why I made my docu-series the way I made my documentary. Because in real life, there's going to be factions that jockey and vie for power. Do you understand why? Because in a nation of some nearly 340 million people, the elites cannot control what every single last solitary person does. They've tried to through their psyops and their horrible public education system, which is now a monstrosity. But, they've tried to by launching a psychological war. It's a psychological war where they try to influence the minds of the people to do what they want them to do, but they cannot control everybody. And what they're so afraid of is that so many people have woken up. Even the people that haven't woken up from the nightmare all the way, they still at least have that basic understanding that there's an evil force controlling things. And, even though that they might still believe in false paradigms like the left-right paradigm, and they might think that the Republicans are good guys or whatever, they're not understanding that there's a lot more to it than that they're still stuck in the old paradigm. But even that will collapse one day. It has to. It's destined to collapse. And there's going to be different factions because there's going to be strong men, people that have functional brains, but they're also sociopaths in many cases. Not all of them, but you're going to have your sociopathic people that take advantage of a weak central ruling regime, this globalist woke regime that's neutered its own capabilities. Folks, if you have a military force that is extremely small, untrained, well, not untrained, but extremely not well trained like they used to be. They're extremely poorly trained. They're increasingly demoralized, poorly equipped, and depleted. How can a military like that be asked to rule a nation, control a nation, hold down a nation that is almost... It's closer to about 4 million square miles. It's like 3,700,000 square miles. It's humongous. This country is ginormous. Let me see the chat real quick. I want to see what people are saying here before I do this here. Yeah, you see these Western global elites, they're not all powerful. They think they are, and they try to convince people that they are, but they're really not. This nation here is immensely vast. It is roughly 3,700,000 square miles in size. Ladies and gentlemen, that is gargantuan. Even if they spread out every man they had in every square mile, just one man, I'm not even saying more than one man, just one man per square mile, they would only fill up this much of it, like this. All of this would be empty. And even the one man they had in each square mile would be immensely outnumbered, in their own respective square miles. They'd be outnumbered. Folks, they can't occupy this whole land. They can't enforce their will everywhere. They scare people with psyops. They scare people into doing what they want them to do, whether that's, scaring some of them into compliance or whether that's agitation or fear propaganda. They scare people to do what they want. And right now, like I put in my documentary, their plan is to divide people so that they can come in after all the people call one another. They call and slaughter each other. Their plan is to let that happen, by doing a whole bunch of overreach and false flagaroonies and cheese. They're going to do overreach. They're going to make all sorts of absurd different laws and all a bunch of garbage. Overreach. They're going to do overreach. So with all the overreach they do, they're going to agitate a whole bunch of people, and then they're going to see the whole system that is basically the whole thing's against them, even the so-called Republicans that aren't even really they're just part of the left-right paradigm, and they're going to see that one day. So then they're going to have divergent groups from that. They're like, okay, you're going to have your woke globalist regime that espouses globalist ideologies and all this green garbage and communistic BS, and you know the drill. So you're going to have your globalist rogue woke regime. It's going to be extremely weak from purging its own military forces. You cannot purge your military of its best people and recruit the worst people, thin it out and hollow it out and deplete it and lower its morale to the point to where that they don't even give a damn anymore. That the morale basically means they're, quote unquote, give a shit factor, how much they care, and no, shit's not a curse word, people, it's a synonym of feces and excrement. I'm an ex-soldier. I talk kind of rough, but hey, it is what it is. So, they have this hollowed out, thin, tiny, woke, depleted military. How are they going to occupy all this with so few people, and most of them don't even care? They're already talking about getting rid of 260. They were talking about axing 260,000 troops for not, conforming and taking their beast mark. Well, let's talk about some of the leadership of the different factions here. This guy, Lieutenant General Mathis here, was the chief of the Army Reserves. Now, the reserves and the Guard, those are not your active duty forces. Now, they're like members of our community, and they're like just regular people like you and I. They're only the part-timers. But like I've said before, the part-timers are even looking more professional now than our active duty. It totally is. I mean, our active duty used to be professional when I was in it, but it's not so professional anymore, folks. It's nothing like it used to be. So it's actually making our part-timers look extremely proficient in what they do about now. It's making them look crop, even though they're just part-timers. But they're like members of our community. They're usually you're just run-of-the-mill average people. Well, he was the chief of the Army Reserves. Now, his office, the Army Reserves, commander's office is actually on an active military post. It's actually on Fort Bragg. But, he created a junta. Now, what's a junta? A junta is a group of military officers that come together and form a sort of leadership corps over their forces. Now, the nation of Myanmar, which was once called Burma, they've been ruled by a military junta for many, many years. Myanmar has been ruled by its military in the form of a junta, a ruling junta, for many years. That was even the case in Sudan, here lately, I believe. I think they overthrew their dictator and they installed a junta. So this guy, Lieutenant General Mathis of the Free American Army, now he was in charge of the junta. Now, they conducted a coup against the rogue globalist regime. Now, you see their political parasites are on strings. They're just puppets, like in real life. Now, here's your uber rich, your Willie Gates and your Red Shield, your Rothschild, as they say in German, your Rothschild. And you got, what's the other ones? There's so many. You got Schwab, you got them all here. They're pulling the strings of the political parasites that basically take their orders, they take their marching orders, and they conduct what? They conduct the policies, right? So they wanted to do a great reset. And they wanted to basically, not just in this country, but also throughout the whole West. They don't control the world, they just control the West. The Western Economic Forum is basically who speaks on behalf of the Western satanic banking elites, right? So they wanted to use them in the United States, to carry out their part of the reset here. But it failed because they launched a coup. Not only did they do that, but also in the docuseries, you had the others rising up. You had the NSRF do their own coup in their own area. They had their own propaganda. This guy was their propaganda chief, Alfred Motufu. And he also became their paramilitary leader, their commander of their paramilitary forces, and also their political leader, while he was the regular military leader, and he was the logistical and economic leader, and also the supreme commandant of the prison camp system. And he was a murderous thug. He was a math professor, so he was cold and calculating, pardon the pun, but, they carried out their own coup. They rose up in Lincoln and in the Midwest, the central Midwest. They expanded into Wyoming, where they ran into the Mormon state, who were crazies of their own. But look, if you think people like this don't exist in real life, in a nation this vast, this country, 340 million people, do you really think, are people that naive that they think that there's not people plotting and scheming in the shadows with their own plans, like brutal sociopaths, like people like this? This guy was an ex-Green Beret, math professor at a university. He worked at a local news affiliate. Now, you had guys like this, the part of the Council of Elders who were these acolytes of the Mormon state who ended up being their leaders. You had Acolyte Issachar, who was a regular acolyte. He raised up the Brigham Young Brigades, which was the first combat forces of the Mormon state, of the fanatical Mormon state. Well, then you had Supreme Acolyte Josiah, their supreme leader. Like he was the leader of the entire faction, and then he was the head of the Mormon state and the head of the Council of Elders. And then you had Grand Acolyte Mordecai here, who was like the right-hand man, like the deputy of Supreme Acolyte Josiah. Well, Grand Acolyte Mordecai, he basically was called the commander of the faithful because he was the second in command, which made him the general, like the head general, essentially, of all the Mormon state combat forces, right under him, who was like their supreme leader, but he was like the head general, basically. So he was called the commander of the faithful. Well, if you don't think that there's religious nuts and kooks like this out there that live on compounds that have their own ideas about how they want to do things, and that they made their own propaganda in the form of sermons where they basically said that the end times prophecies of Joseph Smith were coming true, and they did it in such a way to where they used the turmoil of the whole collapse in the nation. They used the turmoil that was going on as a way to spin it into their sermons in order that people believed them. They've radicalized the whole mainstream of the Mormon church in the documentary. So where I'm going with this is I'm actually going to a list where I'm going to read off to you the real things going on that are happening right now and how they all relate to my documentary. I called a lot of this stuff, you guys. I called it long before it even started to happen. So it's starting to happen now. And I'm going to show you exactly how. So give me 1 second. Let me get my list here. This is important. Oh, man. Just give me 1 second, y'all. I got to find my list of things, man. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right. So, in the documentary, if you all recall in the first video, I mentioned some very specific things that are beginning to happen now. I mean, there might be like one or two things that hasn't quite just started yet, but it will. It will. Okay, so here's the things that began that really got the whole thing started. Okay, I'm going to list them off. You got race riots that were created by the regime as a form of like a false flag type of operation. You had race riots. They were not organic. They were created. You had food stamp riots in Chicago. Well, we've been hearing about a lot of problems with that up there, haven't we? Overreach of all different types. You had false flags, of course. You had mandates. And you had experiment mentioned. Now, when I mentioned experiment and mandates, you know what that was in regard to, obviously. I can't say the word or else, you know what'll happen. But the mandates and experiment were mentioned, and it pertained to the military, and the military wasn't happy with it, if you remember, because they tried to force them to take what? They take the mark. They didn't want to take it. What do we got today? We got 260,000 that they're threatening to kick out. That's like exactly what happened in my story. And they became the Free American Army. Wow, go figure. I called that. What else did we have? Oh, we had drug wars going on in Mexico. Drug wars. That happened in my story, too. And it's happening right now in real time, in real life. And they forced the La Raza narco state. They're not called that in real life. They're just basically whatever they call themselves. But in the story, they were called the La Raza narco state faction, and it forced them to cross the border and do incursions into America, and they took their own territory. That's happening right now, folks. We got to open borders, and we have all these cartels and other, bad actors coming across our borders. So I called that one too. That's happening right now in real time. You can go look it up. The other thing. There were purges of the military going on. That's been going on for quite a while now. That's been happening for the past 2 years. They've been purging the ranks, getting rid of the best people. And that really angered the junta in my documentary because I used that as a real thing too. Woke militias. Well, what do you know? There was one that appeared at an event in Texas, in Dallas. They were guarding a SOD event, an SOD event, if you know what I mean by that. They were guarding one of those disgusting things. So woke militias, they were all geared up in tactical gear. They had weapons and everything. It was a woke Antifa militia. Wow, what do you know? I called that too, because guess what? Due to manpower shortages from the military breaking up into the Free American Army and going to the NSRF in Texas and Florida and so on and so forth, due to that happening, in the Mormon state, due to that happening, they used woke militias. Well, guess what? Woke militias made a debut in Texas, in gear and everything. Gear. They had gear. And they had symbols, like they had patches and stuff. They had gear. They were a full-fledged woke militia, Antifa. That's real, folks. That's happening now, real time. I called that. Let's see what else. Oh, combining and amalgamating all the different alphabet paramilitary forces into one. Now, that has yet to happen yet. But that will happen, mark my words. You will see that. The reason why you'll see that is because they'll want to lighten their bureaucracy and their bloat, and they'll want to, streamline things to make it all easier, make everything fall under one central command so that there's no more bickering, because in an internal conflict, you don't have time to bicker and argue about jurisdiction. No, they're going to merge it all to make their workloads much, much, much easier. You're going to see them all merge into one single entity. Mark my words, you will see it. They'll become like a national paramilitary / policing agency. You will see that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be bold about that. So another thing, in my story, I mentioned how they sold off much of the strategic reserve, nearly all of it. That's happened already. So I called that too way back when I made that. Tiananmen Square style responses to the different rioting and civil unrest and lawlessness, that will happen too. Let's see. There was rioting in all sorts of major cities. Chicago, as mentioned earlier, northeastern cities, and I also said LA specifically. You'll see that. Let's see. That'll happen as soon as the collapse occurs. Now, when there was a dollar collapse, the petrodollar scheme collapsed in the documentary, they defaulted on all obligations, not only like welfare, but they even stopped paying the military until further notice, is what I said in the thing. But that's what they would say, further notice. But they froze all military pay because they can no longer meet their obligations, including welfare benefits and military pay and workers' pay. So when they did that, they instituted their digi-money, their digital dollar, but it was worthless. It was totally worthless. It was still every bit as much, as the original paper money, because they couldn't back it by anything, because they had no assets. They had no hard assets to back the money with. It was continually worthless. It continued to be worthless as a digital money. So in a lot of their areas, they couldn't even use it due to the power issues that they suffered, because the regime areas had patchy power networks. So that caused their money to almost never be used. So it was a total flop. It was a total failure. That's why I tell people, look, you can't use digital anything without electricity. So it's going to be a total flop. It's going to fail. I could care less if they say they're going to implement a digital whatever. It doesn't even matter, because it's not going to be worth anything, and you ain't even going to really be able to use it once anything like this kicks off. So what does it even matter? Other economies are going to crop up to take its place, and that's just stating the obvious. I mean, that's obvious. Just like all the different factions had their own, their own money. Texas had a Texas dollar that they backed with their own gold, because Texas has its own gold repository. They have their own power grid. They have access to the coast. They have their own oil industry, what's left of it. They have their own refineries. So Texas was in the best position to leave out of everybody, and that's why they did. There is a Texas secessionist movement, so that's real. And what they did was, there was a little coup going on within the state itself, like within the state regime. Like 2/3 of it wanted to secede, and the other third and the governor wanted to stay loyal to the globalist regime. But the governor ended up getting arrested and tried for treason, since he wanted to go with the globalists, and the rest didn't. They took control. In Florida, they all changed their mind in Florida. Now, some people, whatever you think of DeSantis, I mean, they ended up changing their mind because they realized that they were about to be kicked to the curb, and they didn't want to lose everything that they already had. So they decided to be on the right side of history. Now, you already see him speaking against the World Economic Forum by name, and he's instituting policies against globalist stuff by name. Like, he's instituting different policies that go straight against the policies of the World Economic Forum. Now, the one questionable thing, I would say, is that they did something in regards to the mark of the beast as far as legislation, saying that they could, force it on people in an emergency. I think he did that. I mean, it's possible. I'm not going to say for sure, but I think it's possible he did that for the time to appease his globalist masters. I don't know if he's really going to actually do that or not, because he's actually done a lot of different policies against World Economic Forum initiatives. So it's kind of I don't know. I mean, they're doing a lot of different things that looks like that they're trying to go their own way, which is why I made them a faction. But then again, you never know. I guess it all depends on who takes the reins of power, and I mean in a struggle type of a situation, like where, one person overpowers another person, not in a situation where things stay the same. Things change at a moment, folks, at a moment's notice. Things can change. Anything can change. There can be struggles within a state regime for power. You never know. There might actually be people who don't want anything to do with globalism. They might take power. You never know. People don't think that America can go in the third world type of direction. People don't believe that America can suffer like any other third world nation where there's power struggles in place, where there's different people that have their own agendas. People don't believe that. People think that the globalists have control of like every single last thing, but that's not true, because there are independent-minded people that can rise up and take power. It's happened all throughout history, Eventually, they met their demise, but, they didn't have anything to do with globalism, and they took power. And the globalists, well, they made war on them. But, and that's how they overthrew them. But, what I'm saying is there's other dynamics in play besides just the globalists. They do not control every last solitary entity and thing. That's just ludicrous. That's ridiculous. They control a lot, but they don't control everything. They do not control everything. And their power will wane in this situation, because you are going to see people like these guys. There will be real people like these, and they will rise up and they will take control in their own areas. Why? Why? Because they cannot keep control everywhere with a castrated, woke, depleted military. It's impossible. They don't have the ability to. It's too small. It's too small. See, that's why they depend so much on PSYOPs. They try to use PSYOPs is because they have to use them, because the people here, there's too many of them, and they're too well equipped, and the land is too vast. They know they cannot physically occupy the land. Logistically, they don't have the logistics. It's quite impossible. The strategic reserve is there for military use, and military use only, or national emergency use, but they sold nearly all of it off. How are they going to project power without fuel? They can't. We depend, if you go by official numbers, we depend on 40% imports for fuel. Imports, 40%. That means we only produce 60%, and that's official numbers. And you know that they lie about statistics. I think it could be more that we depend on for imports by now. At the rate they've been shutting down our oil and gas industry, man, I think we import a lot more than 40%. So here's the thing, they don't have the fuel to operate all these military vehicles for such a tiny force to occupy a country so big. Do you see how big this is? 4 million roads, 3,700,000 square miles of territory, only 2.2 million men. No fuel. Nation's in a food and fuel crisis, man. Food and fuel crisis. Logistically, it's impossible, folks. And personnel-wise, it's impossible. They just don't have the numbers. That'll create a power vacuum. That's going to create a power vacuum that'll cause these types of people to step in and take over. And they absolutely will. You're out of your mind if you think that there's not people like these out there. Any of these people could be real people. I even gave them real jobs. I gave them real jobs. Real jobs, Real jobs, real everything. And they took control. So the NSRF took their territory with it. They had a huge propaganda arm, and their propaganda arm was largely successful. Pirate radio, pamphlets everywhere, distributed everywhere. They had propaganda people everywhere, PR people everywhere. Pirate radio station, NSRF radio. They had meetings in hotel boardrooms. You don't think that, like, okay, business people do that. You don't think that there's other types of people doing that? You don't think that there's people that meet privately in hotels and have meetings about these types of things, about, different leadership cores of different groups? You could have a group that one day was just like a club or something, like a regular club or whatever else, and then the next day it turns into a armed faction. You don't think that can happen? Get real, man. Get real. Grow up. These are real things, folks. If you don't think they're real, you need to get a grip on yourself. These globalists don't control everything, and they're going to lose their power. And in the Bible, the Word specifically mentions that they get judged along with everybody else. And part of the judgment of Babylon is that there will be infighting. Jeremiah talks specifically about that. There will be infighting before the foreign invasion comes, before we are possessed from without and within. So that's very important here. So these are all realistic people, and I made them as real as could possibly be. And they are absolutely going to be people like that rise up and fill a power vacuum left by a weak, castrated, neutered, globalist regime that has no power except in its woke, regime loyalist areas. Because in Syria, the same exact types of things were occurring. Same concepts. There were factions that held different areas of Syria. The Bashar al-Assad regime was not powerful enough to hold all of Syria down. So what makes people think that, outside of PSYOPs, that they have any real power to do anything? They don't. Outside of psychological operations, trying to convince people that they're all powerful and they're mighty and they're going to do this and do that, which they really can't. You know what I always say? When people are like, oh, they said they're going to do this, to us next or do that. You know what I say? I say, how? Tell me how. How are they going to do it? How are they going to get the resources? Where are they going to get the resources? Tell me how they would implement it. Show me logistically how their plans work. Can you show me? Can you show me how they would do it? Where are their vehicles? Where's their fuel? Where's all their food at for this? Where's everything at? And don't tell me it's underground in the dumbs. There's no physical way they could get it all out fast enough and that it's enough for everything for a nation this vast. All the stuff they took down into those dumbs, do you know that's only enough supplies for 200,000 people for 5 years? Do you know that? 200,000 people can be in those dumbs for 5 years with all the supplies they trucked down there. 200,000. Our military's bigger than that. The whole military is 2.2 million. But 300,000 or so, let's say they're overseas. So you really got only 1.9 here at home. But then you got the 300,000 paramilitary, which makes up for the 300,000 troops that are gone. So you still have 2.2 million at the end of the day. So 200,000 can live in those dumbs with the supplies for 5 years. It's not enough for anything that's going on above ground. So tell me again, how are they going to occupy a country this big with 2.2 million people? You tell me how. Tell me how. How do they have the logistics to do it? I don't see it, folks. It ain't there. That's why. I don't see it. I research this stuff. I deep dive. They cannot occupy a country this big. They don't have the logistics, first and foremost, and they don't have the personnel. It's impossible. Why do you think that they want to divide everybody, have them call one another, so that then they can come in and play hero, because then there won't really be that many people left, right? That's their plan. Well, that's one of their plans. They have backup plans if that fails, but they're going to fail because their plans were doomed from the get-go because it's not going to work the way they want it to work. How can it? They don't control everybody. They can't. There's no way. That's why I make my work the way I make my work. And my work has been nothing but prophetic so far. And I'm not even a prophet. I'm not even claiming to be a prophet. But my work sure the hell is prophetic. I've just been led to do good research, good solid research. My research has led me to create these presentations for everybody so that you can see the most realistic rendition of these things before they even happen. The thing going on in Illinois with the lawlessness, folks, that, believe it or not, is part of overreach, because they're making it to where everybody's just going to go mad, you know? What do you think people are going to do when the cops are no longer enforcing the law? People are going to take the law into their own hands, obviously. Obviously. People are going to deal with the criminals themselves, and they're not going to call the cops. They're not going to call the cops. They're going to deal with the criminals themselves, and those criminals are going to end up in lakes or under in the dirt, wherever they end up, you know. But that's only, I'm just stating the obvious here. That's obvious. I mean, what do you think people are going to do? I mean, it's obvious what they're going to do, you know. So that sets the stage for the civil unrest, along with the collapse of the economy and the food stamps, the welfare, the finances with the dollar collapse. It's all coming, folks. When you have a food and fuel collapse, the fuel is how logistics move. You can't move supplies. The supply chain is broke. You can't move supplies without fuel. The trains are a humongous part of the supply chain. They move on diesel. You can carry a whole lot more freight on a train than you can by truck. Why? Because of all the heavy freight that one rail car can carry, and you can keep adding rail cars to a single locomotive. That's why armies prefer to use trains to move their forces, their big forces. Like, you could put a whole brigade on a train. Like, you could put all the vehicles that belong to that brigade on a single train, and you can run it from Fort Hood to Beaumont, down to the coast. Then you can load them on ships, sail them all the way to Al Shuaiba over in Kuwait. That's logistics. That's army logistics with using train. So putting all those heavy vehicles on train cars. So trains move heavy freight. They have the potential to move a lot more freight than trucks. Even though trucks, they move a lot. But trains move a lot more. So without the diesel, that's going to affect the rails. Not only will it affect the rails, but of course it's going to affect the trucks. So now we got a broken supply chain, which means a broken economy, which means a broken country. Everything comes to a standstill. You got whole states going lawless and rogue because the people ain't going to stand. See, the cops ain't even doing their job anymore. So the people are going to do the job for them, right? But they're going to be they're going to become vigilantes. Then they're going to band into factions, and the whole country will band into factions because that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. What do you think people are going to do when they're desperate and there's a total collapse of everything? You think they're going to listen to them? Well, only the globalist loyalist people will. But when strong men raise up, that's the whole gist of this message. That's the whole point. When there's a collapse, and all these strong men raise up in their different areas and promise them better things, promise them they're going to change things. Wow, we're going to change America. They're all going to say their own little spiel, right? Okay, so you got your secular humanist ultranationalists who are diametrically opposed to globalism on the one hand, but they also hate religious kooks. Anything that goes against their new America, they hate. They even hate the Free American Army. Well, what do you think? There's going to be all kinds of factions that hate each other, of course. But not only are they going to fight each other, they're also going to fight the regime. Do you know in the Chinese Civil War, in China, this even happened during World War II also. There was also an internal conflict in China during the ending phases of World War II. So not only did the communists, it was a three-way war. Not only did the communists of Mao Zedong fight the nationalists of Chiang Kai-shek, they not only did they fight each other, but they also fight the Japanese, and sometimes the communists would hang back and let the Japanese weaken the nationalists, and then they would come in and fight the nationalists. Well, it's the same concept here, but it's like a multi-way thing, and it's the same concept as Syria. Different factions fighting each other. When I put up that factional battle map of Damascus, the Battle of Damascus, you saw how it started. There was 2 factions at the very beginning, and then you saw like 7 other factions pop up. They just popped up. It was a 7-way battle inside Damascus. 7-way. See, I had a 4-way battle here, fighting over the Hoover Dam in Vegas. I had a 3-way battle here for Macon. There'd be things like that going on, folks. It's obvious. I had a 3-way battle at Martinville right here, where the lines all come together right there, Martinville, Virginia, very southern part of Virginia. So, there's going to be things like that. in an American-Syrian conflict. But, these elites do not control everything. They're going to lose their power. Their power is going to wane because it's part of their judgment, too. It's part of the judgment of the whole nation. It's the judgment of the entire nation from the top down. Top down. They don't run everything, you guys. They don't. There's a lot of dynamics in the world. See, people like to simplify it by looking at it like, oh, well, they run the whole world. No, they don't. That's a Western-centric point of view. Because you live here, you automatically assume that the Western elites run everything when they don't. As I showed you at the beginning of the video, there's very, very wealthy Eastern elites and lots of them. More than we have even. So, especially when you combine Russia, India, and China's class of elites together. Wow. That's a lot of wealth concentrated in one part of the world. So, I'm saying that to say this, folks. The way I've portrayed these things is exactly how it'll happen, insofar as the concepts are concerned. You will see a multi-way Syrian-style internal conflict. The elites are not all powerful. They don't control everything. And God is going to pull them down from their place. And it's all going to start with something like this, the concept of different factions duking it out, Then it's going to move on to a foreign invasion. They're going to try and run and hide in their dumbs. But guess what? The way that we humiliated Saddam Hussein is going to be the way that these Western elites are humiliated. See, they sold us out originally back in the 90s, well, really even earlier than that, if you go back to the Nixon era. They sold us out thinking that they were going to get trinkets and wealth and all this, which they did. They got paid off pretty good. But some of them got extorted because they got caught in some bad things by the Chinese MSS, their intelligence service / secret police. They got caught in some nasty acts. So they've been, coerced into betraying the nation. So, okay. Well, then, that's all that ended up getting the Chinese into the position they're in now. So they thought that these Western elites thought that they were going to sell the nation off, and they were going to get trinkets, and they were going to get to live the good life, which, they did for a little while, but, they're not going to get away with it. That's the whole point. They're not going to get away with it. They're going to get pulled down. They're going to get sucked down, and it's all going to start with, they don't believe in cause and effect. That's what I'm trying to explain to you all. There are laws of cause and effect. You cannot destroy and eviscerate your own power base and honestly, seriously expect to remain viable. Viable, meaning that you're able to function. You're able to function the way that you need to function. You're not going to be viable. You are never going to have this. You're never going to have this, that, and that. You're not going to have that. The reason you're not going to have that is because they castrated their own security forces. And it's not just America, folks. It's Europe, too, Western Europe. I've read you the four strongest biggest Western European NATO contributors. They're barely even a third as far as personnel strength. They're only a third of what Russia has, and Russia's even a lot smaller than China. But they're only a third combined of what Russia has in personnel. And in vehicles, it's even worse. The disparity is even larger. It's a huge disparity in the numbers of equipment. Russia has vastly more equipment than the Western European NATO nations. So it's not just an American problem, you guys. It's a Western problem. The Eastern elites are not, pushing, certain genderisms, and they're not, you know what I'm talking about. They don't have, certain story hours at their libraries. They don't believe in this green energy crap. Look at China. It's one of the most polluted places on Earth. Their factories go nonstop. They meet the quota till they die. They never stop meeting the quota. It's like from cradle to grave. It's just meeting the quota, working, producing. Like they're just, fools about, building and producing. They don't care about anything else. They don't give a shit about what the West cares about. They don't care. The CCP doesn't give a rat's ass about us, our leaders, our elites. None of them. And at the first opportunity, man, they're going to plunge that dagger in so deep. Man, they're going to feel it, man. They're going to feel it. So the Chinese are going to absolutely do that. So, they don't care about, they don't have the same values. They hate us. Their propaganda depicts us all as bankers and snakes. I mean, come on now. Come on. They've never controlled the CCP. The CCP has always been its own thing, and it's been its own set of elites. And they've only ever been focused on building up China. They don't give a shit about globalism. They don't give a shit about none of that. They took advantage of it, but they don't care about it. They only care about China and the CCP. The CCP only cares about the CCP. The CCP doesn't give a shit about these people, man. They could care less. Neither do the Russians, really. Russians and Chinese, though, they're thick as thieves, man. And they're going to get us. They're going to have their own reset. And the Eastern reset involves colonizing all of this. This is going to be colonized. Canada, too. There ain't nowhere to go, folks. You know, you're just going to have to become nomadic or semi-nomadic at the least. You're going to have to rotate, between your positions. That's just how it's going to have to be. You're not going to get away from what's coming. So I'm going to start interacting with the chat here a little bit before I keep talking a little longer. Oh, let me see what everybody's saying. And I do appreciate everybody that's joined me this morning. I thank you for bearing with me. I didn't want to do it this early, I know, but I had to because I'd be probably asleep by this evening. Been up a while. So let me see what everybody's saying here. I hope I explained that well. I hope there's nobody that's, missing anything from that explanation. I hope it was clear, crystal clear. Push some buttons here. See what everybody's saying. Yeah, they don't have. Boris, they don't have control over everything. I mean, there's two sets of elites. There's Eastern and Westerns, but there's even nations that aren't even fully controlled by them. They're like China sunk their teeth into Africa before the West really got to. You see, the West tried to just keep Africa poor and take advantage of them, but like China came in, and largely, by and large, these African nations did deals with China for Belt and Road stuff. They got indebted to China. China took them over. Now China gets to get all the rare earths and other resources from the African nations that are now basically Chinese vassal states. So the West squandered a good opportunity to make allies in Africa. And now China is largely in control of Africa. So that shows that there were non-aligned nations before all of this really got, heated up. So, there's a lot of things here. Yeah, there just goes to show you that, the West is ever more being isolated and losing its influence and its power. The Western Economic Forum can sit up there and talk all the BS they want and the psyops they want, but in reality, if you look at the actual facts, figures, stats, capabilities, and the reality that's going on around you, the reality is that these people are losing power. They're not gaining power. They're just trying to tighten their grip because what does a cornered animal do? When an animal's cornered, what do? They fight, right? They fight. These Western elites are cornered. They're cornered. They realized that their sanctions backfired. The Russians flat out say that they hate the Western Economic Forum and that they're going to achieve their goals. And they said that, they're going to cut off the West from their resources. It's over. The Eurasian bloc is rising, making prophecy come true. There is going to be a situation where a coalition of nations comes from the north, which over the Arctic Sea, it sits who? It sits Russia, China, and the rest of the Eurasian bloc. Pakistan, North Korea, all their little allies too. So there is a Eurasian bloc rising. And the New World Order is going to be an Eastern New World Order. The West is falling, everybody. The West is failing. They're failing. The West is over. They're a cornered animal trying to hold on to what little power they have left. Why? Because it's like a poker game. They made some bad gambles, and now they lost big time. The whole Eurasian bloc, the BRICS, whatever you want to call them, and something I'm sure different is going to come out of the BRICS. They're going to morph into like a new type of UN. It'll be an Eastern, like Chinese and Russian ran UN. But, there's going to, come a day where, now that we're fully being surrounded We are. We are. Well, we tried to do the USSR in the Cold War by encircling them with bases and, NATO, and we had Japan. We had all these different bases all over Europe and Asia to try and encircle the Soviet Union. And then, of course, Canada. We had our early warning radars up there in Canada, by the North Pole. We had everything in Alaska too. We tried to encircle and contain the USSR. So what we did to the USSR. The roles are now reversed, and China and Russia are doing to us and the West. They are containing us, folks. That's the reality. That's the reality. And there's no denying it. It is irrefutable fact and proof. So, I guess I went live at a really bad time. Nobody's here. I guess everybody's at work. Oh well, it'll be up for people to watch on the replay. No big deal. But yeah, nobody's really chatting very much. There's a lot of independent-minded people, Boris. They can't control everybody. There's no way. I mean, their psyops can only do so much. I mean, sure, they've convinced a lot of people of a lot of bullshit and just stuff that isn't so. But if you look at the reality and not the hype and not the psyops, not the agitation propaganda, not the fear propaganda, none of that stuff. If you don't look at that stuff, it becomes apparent and clear when you're looking at just raw data, raw facts. The things are not what they seem, Things are not what they seem. These psyops that they craft, just because they have Hollywood and they can make these movies and try to make like predictive programming and whatever else, they're just people at the end of the day. They make mistakes, They make mistakes. They make mistakes. They make huge mistakes. And, they're not all that in a bag of chips. They're more like all that in a bag of shit. They don't run everything, even though they have Hollywood and they've got special effects and they can, oh man, I saw something funny the other day. I mean, I hate to change the subject a tiny bit, but I have to say this. I saw a little thing. It was one of these like space things that they do where they show this, studio or CGI BS. Well, they showed this thing about what was it? The space telescope. Guess what? There was a mouse crawling on it. A mouse. A real live mouse was crawling on this thing. So, their studio effects didn't work out so great in that one. But see, that's just the illusions that these people craft are unbelievable, but they're becoming exposed. They're being exposed. And part of my job as a researcher and a record keeper is to expose these people. I'm exposing them for their frauds and their lies. They're liars. This video is probably going to be heavily shadow banned, and a lot of people aren't going to watch it, I bet. But you know what, though? It's all good. It's all good. I don't even care. But I'm doing what I was told to do by God, by Almighty God, the Father. I'm doing it. So I'm exposing these people for the frauds they are. They're not going to be on top forever. They're going to be held accountable for all their wickedness, all their evil, and they're going to be brought down little by little. See, because in castrating themselves and purging their own security forces, they made a bad gamble at the proverbial poker table. Because how are you going to enforce your will? Like I said earlier, how? How? Tell me how. How are you going to enforce your will without, the actual boots on the ground to do it? You can't do it with psyops alone. I mean, they think they can, but they can't. You can't get everybody to comply with your will with only psyops. I mean, there's too many people that are now hip to these things. They're not going to convince everybody of it. It's just impossible. There's going to be strong men that create their own propaganda, their own psyop to, turn people against other agendas. People are going to end up destroying and casting off the old paradigms. All the old paradigms are going to fall to the wayside. I'm saying that right now, Like old Project Gray Man, how he has his prophecies. Well, you know what? I'm gonna say one for myself because I see this clear as day. Even though some others might not, I see it clear as day. The left-right paradigm is about to collapse. Everybody, it's going to collapse. That's why there's going to be a factional Syrian-style conflict, because there's going to be people who rise up as strong men, like mini dictatorial types or mini autocrats, who raise up in their own regions and areas, and they take power. They're going to have their own propaganda arms, everything. That's real. That's real. That's reality. There's people that seriously think that there's not, bad actors out there or other people. That's just crazy to me. Like, people, look at all these other nations around the world and how quick their regimes lose control in internal conflicts. And then people think that that can't happen in America. Man, you're sorely mistaken. You're horribly mistaken. It doesn't matter what this regime says or does. They're not always going to be in the position that they're in to make demands on people or to enforce everything. Because once you neuter your own armed forces, your own power base, you've thereby neutered your ability to enforce your will upon other people. Because you're not always going to be able to use psyops to get everybody to do what you want. Your psyops can only go so far. At the end of the day, you still need boots on the ground to, enforce your will. You cannot do that when you have totally eviscerated your own security forces. It's mentally retarded. It's something a feeble-minded moron would do. Their morale is at an all-time low. Their training is horrible compared to what it was back when I was in. The types of personnel that they have now. This new generation is just pathetic. The old generation could whoop their ass, man, compared to what these people are like. I mean, it's just a joke. It's a joke. People don't take account of all the different dynamics in play. There's so many dynamics in this country. People just don't see it. They're not aware of it. They don't understand. There's a lot of people that are totally independent of this system that are going to do their own thing when there's a collapse. They're going to seize power. They're going to have their own armies. They're going to have their own will, their own agendas. And, there's been past precedents of this. Like the Weather Underground, they were their own entity. There were other groups like them, too. Weather Underground was just the only one that ever got caught. But then Bill Ayers eventually, was contacted by the, Western elites. But I'm just saying, though, before he was arrested, they were their own thing. They were infiltrated by Larry Grathwohl, who was an FBI informant. And he infiltrated the Weather Underground, but that just goes to show you. You see, that was in the 70s. That was a much more tranquil time than right now. So what do people think is going on now? So people think that there's not bad actors like that lurking in the shadows? You don't think so? Well, get a grip. Get a grip. Of course there are. Of course there are, and a lot more, People don't think that there's, like, other bad actors, like different lone wolf types that would do horrible things. Well, look what you just saw the other day. A crazy dude that went on that spree. Think about it. People are going to be seeing a lot more madness, insanity, psychopathy like that. There's going to be people like that join the factions too, as bad actors. I even put that in my documentary. Like the math professor of the NSRF. He contacted a bunch of different, like, computer hackers to do denial of service attacks and ransomware attacks, all sorts of stuff. And he also contacted, mad, it rhymes with mom, but starts with a B. He contacted the mad, mommers, that he knew, like these, Kaczynskis and, McVeigh types. And, people don't understand that there's so many nutcases out there. There's so many bad actors that lurk in the shadows, lone wolves or people that have their own agendas. They have their own ideologies, their own plans. This nation has 340 million people in its borders. And then you also got the other issues, like you got the, Mexican, drug narco gangs and everything. And, you got all sorts of different religious militants. You got all kinds of stuff in this country that people don't even see, that's under the surface, just bubbling. It's bubbling under the surface, and people don't even see it. They don't even know it's there. All one day it's just going to erupt, and people are going to wonder how the hell it even happened when this place goes totally mad. This place will be a madhouse. Hell, the cops up in Illinois ain't even going to be worth even calling because they're not going to do anything. What does that tell you? That tells you this regime has like no power anymore. It's just totally just a shit show. It's nothing but a joke. It's all psyops. All their power lay in their psyops because they don't really have any hard power anymore because they've castrated their own forces. It's like with the 87,000 number that, from last month that was talked about. Who are they? There's a bunch of pencil pushing punks, I mean, like, what are, it's a joke, man. People acting like that's intimidating. Get real. That's not even enough people to do anything. That's maybe just enough people to, like, control a city, if that. Because it's the type of people. They have no training. They have no knowledge of anything. They're just like worthless, basically. They're worthless. In terms of like security or military value, they're totally worthless people. They can't really do anything. Or it's a joke. So, if I was worried about it, I'd sure say I was worried about it, but I'm not worried about it. I'm just chilling. I think it's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. See, their psyops depend on the ability to be able to make examples of other people, and they do it for high optics, meaning that they do things that are either really high profile, like what they did with their puppet at his Mar-a-Lago place. They do either really high profile things that'll be seen by everybody that they know everybody will see, like, oh my God, they did this to so and so, it's gonna happen to me too. No, but then they also do these, they do things to like cuckolds or actors that they paid to like play the role of the dupe that, gets, bothered at his house or whatever. And they just do stuff so that they can make an impression and, put fear and, and just give people anxiety, which is just totally false anxiety. People shouldn't even be worried about it. It's a complete joke. People don't even understand the vastness that is America. Like, you don't even understand how big this country is. If you've ever been on an like just a commercial air flight, and you look out the window and you see how small everything is, and how far the expanse of land just is, like, endless almost. It's endless, and there's so many homes and cities below as you're flying, and you can see all these farms and this place is ginormous. There's 4 million miles of roads. There's no physical way they can control this land. Not with boots on the ground, they can't, That's why they use psyops. The only people that could physically control this nation is China. China alone or China with allies. So that's why China and Russia and the others are going to be the only ones to be able to achieve such a feat, because they have the personnel to be able to do such a thing. As for like the West doesn't have the people. Okay, so if they conscripted the Europeans, who's going to sit in Europe and, defend against, Russia and China when they steamroll them? Even the forces they already have in Europe aren't even enough to do that. So what are they going to do? Send European troops over here, the tiny ass armies they have? It's a joke, man. It's a joke. Their armies are puny. In the Cold War, the Europeans used to be forces to be reckoned with. The Germans, the British, the French, Italians, they used to have big armies, man. A German reunification, when East and Germany reunited, East and West Germany, they had almost 1 million men under arms between the reserves and the active forces of East and West Germany. They had almost 1 million men under arms. It was like 900,000 men that were under arms. I mean, just when they reunited, before they started like downsizing, because they started like hawking off some of the old East German equipment and a little bit of their West German stuff. They started to downsize a little bit. But at reunification, Germany was a massive military power when they reunited. They had a lot of tanks, man, and artillery, and aircraft, and ships. Germany was a major military power in 1990. Like, you don't even understand. Like, they were the second biggest military in Europe after the Soviet Union at reunification. I'm talking about when East and West Germany reunited. They were the second biggest army in Europe after reunification. Then what did they do? They totally neutered themselves to where they're such a joke now. They're such a joke. The Germans are so weak now, it's unreal. How they could never stop Russia now. At least they had a chance before. It's too late now. There's no way they can replace all the stuff they sold, all the stuff they gave away. It's ridiculous. Like they spend like almost no money on their military. So there's one example of a just a total joke of a European military. You know, the Germans have had a base in the United States for a long time at Holloman Air Force Base. That was actually their North American Luftwaffe command. Like for North, they had a North American Air Command and for the Luftwaffe, and it was out of Holloman Air Force Base. They also have a base in Canada. You know, so just I don't know if people were aware of that because people made such a huge deal out of the NATO thing in Norfolk, but really, NATO's had a base in America forever. They've had one in Holloman, so the NATO thing isn't that big of a deal. I mean, the Germans have been here longer than the French, so I wouldn't even worry about that shit. You know, it's just one base. The Chi-Coms have thousands of bases, meaning all the the CCP properties that are controlled by the CCP that have PLA, PAP, maybe National Militia, whoever else they've got of their forces just sitting there. And of course their allies like the Russians and whoever else too. But here's the thing, they've got it to where the CCP is the big danger here, not NATO, not NATO. NATO's a joke. NATO's a has-been. NATO's a joke. They can't stop anybody. They can't even defend Europe. They can't defend. We can't defend ourselves. We're a complete joke now. We'll get overrun in a few days, a matter of a few days. We've castrated and neutered ourselves, hollowed ourselves out, depleted ourselves with all the stuff we've given away. It's a disgrace, man. It's a total disgrace. Complete disgrace. We're not a superpower anymore. We're a joke now. We're like the butt of a joke. It's unreal. See what people are saying. I promised I'd interact. I got on a monologue again. Oh boy. Let's see what's being said here. Hey, First Love Me. Great to see you. Hey, what's up, Jeremy? Yeah, I think now that more people are in here, I'll be able to interact more. There weren't that many people in here just a little while ago, but I guess I got started too early. Yeah. Well, I hope you all are doing great this morning. But yeah, the thing is with the Western militaries is they're in complete shambles. The German military used to be a force to be reckoned with in 1990. Even until 2010, the Germans were pretty strong, but then they started really downsizing. I think the Germans, after what they've already just given away to Ukraine, they used to have 1,000 extra tanks that were in storage, but they gave Ukraine a lot of their stuff. Like they gave them the Gepards, and I think they gave them a few of their Leopard 1s. But the Germans only have 400 Leopard 2s. 400 Leopard 2s in active service. As badass of a tank as the Leopard 2 is, the Leopard 2 is a badass tank. The Leopard 2A7, that's a badass tank. But they only have 400. 400. Russia has 12,500 tanks. 12,000. That's not even man, that's what 5% of what Russia has, if that. That's nothing. That's a joke. That's a joke. And Germans cannot compete with Russia, nor can France, nor can Italy, nor can Britain. None of them can. They're going to get steamrolled by Russia. And of course, China's there to help them. China's sitting there in Serbia and likely in Belarus too. Oh, I forgot to say, the thumbnail I picked is a Chinese tank at the military drills outside of Moscow that they held. Chinese equipment recently was seen in Russia on the rails headed toward Europe. So it was in European Russia. That was taken in Moscow, right outside the city at their military drills. So China did joint military drills with the Russians outside of Moscow. That's what I used for the thumbnail. And that was just here recently too. I'm sure that those Chinese armored forces moved on to Belarus too. That was a Type 96B tank, one of the two types of new tanks they have. The Type 96 and the Type 99 look pretty similar, but they're actually completely different tanks. They're both very modern, both very powerful. The 99A is that's probably the best tank in the world. Maybe the Russian T-14 is a close contender to that. I mean, that's got some good stuff too. But yeah, the Type 99A surpasses the Abrams in basically every category, and the Leopard too. And also the Type 96B is pretty badass too. It's at least the contemporary, the equal of the M1A2. But that thing's still a badass tank. They're both brand new. Those are the two brand new tank designs they use. Of course, they use the older Type 80, 85, and 88 series, which are all really like the same chassis, but they have different turrets. Now, the Type 85 looks a lot like the Type 96 does, but it's got a lot of explosive reactive armor kits on it. Where they usually roll like that. They have all this explosive reactive armor added to it, so it's like an upgrade. Same with the 99A, but the 85 was pretty badass. I mean, for the Type 80, 88 series, that's a badass turret choice. The 85, but the 88 is more like a round, like a domed turret, sort of like the older ones that they had. In my Chinese tank video, I think I showed a. No, I didn't show a picture of it. I put a picture of it in the community post I made for when I was doing that video, but then I took that down. No, but the 88 has like a more like dome turret. It's like the older style turrets, but that can have explosive reactive armor packages added to it too. It's just not as good of a turret as the 85 series. But those are their three newest tanks. But the 96B and the 99A, those are like the cream of the crop, like the best of the best. But the 85 was pretty good too. It's better than the 69, 79 series, and also the way older but way upgraded Type 59D. 59D, for being so old, that's a hell of an upgraded tank. That thing's got explosive reactive armor on it. It's got gun stabilizer. It's got a laser rangefinder, thermal and night vision optics. So that thing can fire accurately while on the move. It's got new radios, combat data link. That thing is beefed up to be such an old tank, and they have 8,000 of those things, but they upgraded them all of them. Badass tanks for being so old. The gun on those things is the upgraded L7 copy that they have that can actually fire ATGMs, which can actually destroy an Abrams. So they're still plenty lethal on the battlefield. Plus, they can fire the depleted uranium ammo, and they can also fire tungsten sabot rounds. Tungsten sabot rounds are pretty powerful. Thing will puncture right through an Abram at about 2,000 meters. They have to get in a little closer to get a kill, but they can still kill an Abrams, even for being such an old tank. They have so many of them too. They have like 8,000 of those. Those things are like still plenty deadly. They're not as good, obviously, as their newer stuff. Their newer stuff's just way modern, but the older upgraded stuff, it's still plenty lethal, and they still have a ton of those things. See, the Iraqis, like I've said before, they didn't know how to use their armor in the Gulf War like their Chinese and Soviet-made tanks. They didn't know how to use those. If they'd have used them like, in actual mobile warfare instead of using them as stationary, like, defense positions or artillery, which was retarded. It's not how you're supposed to use a tank. If they actually used them in mobile warfare, like shooting and moving, flanking, and going behind and hitting supply lines with them, they actually could have been like very much more effective than they were. Well, they still probably would have lost, but they'd have done a lot more damage to us. They would have killed a lot more of our people, destroyed a lot more of our vehicles that way. But they were pretty dumb. That's because Saddam was a moron, and he tried to interfere in tactical affairs and strategic affairs. He didn't let his generals, run the war like he should have. But that was a good thing for us at the end of the day. So we had a lot less fatalities. But yeah, see how everybody's doing here. See if anybody else came in. Who's all in here? What's that, Boris? Yeah, well, yeah, Russia didn't send in that much manpower at all. I mean, but they really haven't had success. That's a lot of just BS. I've been watching, I've been following that Ukraine situation here and there. I'm annoyed by it, but at the same time, I'm interested in it because I like to see how the battles are moving. See, Russia, what they do is they sit back, since they use so little people, they sit back and they fire a ton of artillery and missiles to wear down the Ukrainians, and then they also, throw up really strong defense when the Ukrainians do their suicidal, like, human wave assaults, like they've done recently at Kherson. Kherson was a tragedy for the Ukrainians. They said they were going to do this huge offensive, but all they ended up doing was just throwing away a lot of Ukrainian lives. It's horrible. It's evil. Zelensky's a piece of garbage, man. He's a horrible leader. He's evil, and so is Putin. They're both evil. they're just slaughtering a whole bunch of Ukrainians for over nothing, really, over nothing. I mean, to the Russians it means something. It has to do with their overall strategy of national defense to the Russians, but to the Ukrainians, they're just throwing lives away. They should have just surrendered, and got it over with. I mean, I thought they were going to collapse, like back in July, because they were down to using old men. Since June, they've been using old men. All their best, youngest, regular troops, they're either still stuck in pockets in the Donetsk area, or in the Donbass, or they've been captured or killed. So they're using old men to fill a whole bunch of areas of their lines with them. They send so many videos out showing all these just old men just in these bunkers. It's sad. They're getting shelled nonstop and slaughtered. It's horrible, man. It's got to stop soon, man. It's just a waste of lives. But the Russians are totally kicking Ukraine's ass, man. They're kicking their ass. Russia's just doing it a different way. See what they've achieved, being outnumbered 10-1 inside of Ukraine. See, Russia has a humongous military compared to Ukraine, but they didn't send in but 70 battalions. So inside of Ukraine, their 63 or 65,000 troops is outnumbered some 10-1 by the Ukrainians inside of Ukraine. That was how it was at the beginning. But now they've worn the Ukrainians down substantially. The Ukrainians are like running out of people, seriously. Like, it's getting bad for them. I'm surprised that they're still even fighting. I think what Russia's doing is they're just, just tuckering them out, just wearing them down, just wait until they get wore out, until they're extremely weak, and then they're just going to sweep the whole rest of Ukraine. I think that's what they're really going to do. I do. I think that what they're doing, they're letting the Ukrainians throw all these troops at Russia, and so Russia's just annihilating them and waiting until Ukraine's totally exhausted all their human resources and all their Western aid, and then they're going to sweep Ukraine and just knock them out. I think that's what they're going to do. That would make the most sense to me. Seems the most logical outcome here. It's horrible, though. Yeah. Well, how's everybody doing? Hope everybody's doing all right. Yeah, really, they could, Boris. Yeah, the Russians annihilated Ukraine in their Ukrainians' last offensive. Ukraine was only able to send. You see, Ukraine ended up getting 2 Su-25s as aid. I think Poland sent them like two ground attack aircraft. They sent them these 2 Su-25s that were like surplus, and then all they could do for this offensive was use some old T-72s that Poland gave to Ukraine. So they used a handful of tanks that Poland gave them. So they put together a tiny little armored force. I think they only had like 50 tanks or something. Like, it was a little small number of tanks. So they had like 50 tanks. They had like 2 Su-25 ground attack planes, which both got shot down by Russian air defense. Russia barely even uses their air power. I mean, they've used their heavy strategic bombers before, but only in very small missions, like when they dropped that KAB-500 on the Azovstal place, where the Azov battalion were hiding. They dropped that KAB thermobaric on them with one of their heavy strategic bombers. It was a Tu-22M strategic bomber that they dropped the KAB-500. It was a big thermobaric conventional warhead, or not warhead, but a free fall munition. It was like TV guided, like they use like a TV screen to guide the fins on it so that it would drop accurately on its target after being dropped. So yeah, I read up on the KAB-500. It's a pretty interesting weapon. But anyway, they use that from a strategic bomber, and they've also used strategic bombers to fire standoff cruise missiles at ground targets. They've used ships to fire cruise missiles. They've used ground missiles like their Iskander tactical ballistic missiles, and other ground-based cruise missiles. They've used all of that on Ukraine. They've just totally worn them down, man, with missiles and artillery, just all the time. Russia averages about 20,000 artillery shells a day. A day. That's enormous. They've so far in this war, just the howitzer shells, just artillery shells. They've used over 3,600,000 shells. Ukraine was only able to fire 6,000 a day, and that was only for the first 2 months. And then they ran out, basically. because either their artillery depots were either captured or they ran out of shells from other depots, and then they had to depend on Western aid, or they were destroyed. Their other depots, some of their depots were completely destroyed, but they were able to fire 6,000 shells, the Ukrainians, per day for about the first couple months of the conflict. Then they just basically were like taken out. Like it was like they had like no more shells left. So then they had to depend on Western aid. So the Western nations sent them some howitzers, some shells, but then, that's starting to exhaust our stocks because we don't have anywhere near as many stocks as the Russians. And that goes for the Western European nations and the United States. Did you know that in the NATO war drills that Britain and France exhaust their entire stock of artillery, of howitzer artillery shells? Their whole stocks are gone after 8 days. 8 days is all it takes for them to exhaust all their artillery, Britain and France, their national stocks. And then the United States would expend in 10 days what they can only produce in a whole year of artillery shells. So if you took American stocks that we actually do have, that we haven't like pissed away yet, plus what we can make in a year, that would give us about 2 months worth of artillery before we would be out, like totally out completely. 2 months, man, we would be completely out. Britain and France are already out in like 8 days. 8 days, like just a week and a day. That's pathetic, man. It's pathetic. Here, Russia is like, what is it, like going on 5 months, and they've expended just an enormous amount of artillery. That's not even counting their rocket artillery, which is also enormous that they've expended, and their missiles too, and everything. They've expended, over 1,000 something missiles. I've tallied it before. I've mentioned it on here before. I've got it wrote down, but I'm not going to go up and get it right now. I've mentioned it before. People can go back and find that. It's my past lives. Yeah, it's immense. It's immense. The Russians have immense stockpiles, and they have an immense production capacity for military ammunition and equipment. China is even bigger, way bigger than what Russia is as far as their production capabilities and their stocks. Chinese stocks are just, I don't even have a word for how big they are. Plus, their industrial capacity is ginormous. I mean, there's no word for it. It's like a blue whale compared to, like, Russia's an elephant, but China's like a blue whale when it comes to like just their size of like everything. They're certainly not a country you want to mess with. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, but Ukraine's in big trouble. So is the West. And Ukraine has paid dearly. They've paid dearly for aligning with the West, for being a Western proxy, for being so willing to be a Western proxy. They've paid dearly. And only the people have suffered. The piece of garbage that runs Ukraine, he's probably going to run off and take the money and run off to one of his foreign mansions he has in one of these other countries. He's a piece of trash. But you know what? He'll be judged. He'll be judged too, and he won't even escape judgment. He'll be judged for what he did to his own people, for allowing them to be slaughtered wholesale by the Russians. He's going to be judged for that. He absolutely will. Just like these Western leaders, when they start losing their grip on power, and then they get pulled out of their hidey holes by the Russians and Chinese down the road, you better believe Zelensky's going to be judged too. He's going to be found. They'll probably get him and, capture him from one of these mansions when the Russians and Chinese take over. They're going to find him. They're going to find him and drag him out, kicking and screaming, just like the rest of them. Do you know who I am? I'm Klaus Schwab. They're not even going to care. They're going to turn them into a footstool for Xi Jinping, or have them working in a camp. And that's the real deal about that. That's how it's going to happen. Just like they've always humiliated ancient kings in ancient times, the same applies in modern day. You better believe it. In ancient times, I remember there was one king, he got humiliated by being used as a stepping stool for the king that defeated him. He was used as a stepping stool for the king that defeated him to get on his horse. He would step on the other king's back, the defeated king's back, to get on his horse. Like he would use him as a stool. That's why I say that they're going to become Xi Jinping's footstool. When he's sitting on his gold and red throne, He's probably going to use Klaus Schwab's back as a footrest, as a stool, or one of them. They're going to be humiliated. People don't understand that. They're not escaping judgment. But that's not to say that these Eastern elites don't get judged, because they absolutely get judged. Even though they make it to the Battle of Armageddon at the end of time, oh yeah, they're going to get theirs too. They're not going to like the lake of fire. Because if you're one of the 10 kings that gives your power to the beast, that's where you're going. So, yeah, they ain't going to like that. But unfortunately, we're stuck with China and Russia until the end of time. So they're going to be the world, hegemon nations. It's going to be a Chinese and Russian world. And that's just the way it's going to be. The 10 kings, China and Russia are going to obviously be two of the strongest of the 10 kings that give their power to the beast. There's the other 8 will also be Eastern kings in that Eastern bloc. The West is finished. People don't like to admit it because, we live in the West, I understand that, but that's just the way it is. These Western elites are going to be destroyed. They're going to be destroyed. They're going to be humbled. Sure, yeah, they're going to try and implement their plans, but men make plans and God laughs. Just because they say they're going to do something, just because they have Hollywood movies that are Hollywood is witchcraft, okay? The holly tree. It's what they make a sorcerer's wand from. Hollywood. Just because they have Hollywood and they can put people under spells and convince people that they know all these future events because of what they put in movies. Well, sure they do. They do witchcraft and they see the parts of the future. They don't see the whole future, but they're allowed to see parts of it. So they put it in movies and they make these predictive programming. But that doesn't mean that they're in full control of what happens in the future. No, God's in control. Because God's the ultimate arbiter of decision making that decides and what he's going to allow them to do and not allow them to do. That's why I say, men make plans and God laughs. They're not going to succeed because there's a such thing called free will, and everybody has free will, and not everybody is going to choose with their free will to go along with the agenda. So yeah, prophecy is going to come to pass. There will be infighting, like Jeremiah mentions. There's going to be an internal conflict. Prophecy is going to come to pass. My research backs that up. Prophecy is going to come to pass. There will be an internal conflict. The power of these kings will wane. And I'm talking about the Western elites. Their power will wane. And it's going to start little by little because judgment has different phases. First, they're going to become like Bashar al-Assad. They're going to start losing their power over the nation, over areas, because you cannot control all these people. You cannot physically control all of them. They're going to try it, but they're going to fail, like Assad did. Assad lost a lot of territory quick to the factions. And other internal conflicts, if you go study those and watch how those erupt and how they, move and happen, you'll see really quick that a lot of dictators and autocrats and rulers and elites, they lose their power quick. It's not hard. Because not everybody with free will is going to go along with the regime that's in charge. That's just the way it happens in many modern internal conflicts. So naturally, America's not immune from that. America's not immune. Of course, if there's an internal conflict here, you're going to have different factions jockeying for power. Okay? Because a castrated military is not strong enough to occupy the entire land. It's not physically possible with the number of people. It's not possible with their resources. They're almost out of fuel. I mean, come on now. Military vehicles require it. They're having a food and fuel crisis. They cannot physically occupy this whole land. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. So the only ones that can do that is China, Russia, and their allies. So until that happens, there's going to be a horrible, brutal Syrian-style internal conflict. There's going to be different leaders who rise up in different areas and they seize power. Of course, the globalist regime will still have their woke loyalist areas, but everything else is going to be a flop. Everything they try to do is going to be a big flop. It's not going to work out the way they think or they want it to. I don't care what their sorcery says. I don't care what their psyops sorcery says. I don't care what they say they're going to do to us or whatever. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. because everybody's got free will at the end of the day, and a lot of people ain't going to go along with what their agendas are. That's just the way it is, you know. So, you know, people, whether they admit that or not, that's just the way it is, you know. But I've been going on here a long time, so let's see what's going on here. It's been a really good live. I've actually been enjoying this one, talking to everybody. That's not true, Jeremy. China's not in bed with the WEF. China hates the WEF. They put a mole in the WEF to tell them, yeah, go along with your globalist agendas. Yeah, China's not doing globalist stuff in China. They're not at all. No, China's doing their own thing. So is Russia. The WEF is the separate, like, rival mafia syndicates. You know, there's two rival mafia syndicates. There's the Western elites and the Eastern elites. They're not in the same thing. My End of the West, Not the World is actually a really good one, Jeremy. You'd really like that. I really break all the details down that explains, like, the differences and you know, how China has actually subverted the West and its plans. And they have their own plans because they're going to colonize the West. So is Russia. They don't care about the WEF. The CCP could give a rat's ass about them. They don't care about them whatsoever at all. The CCP is about the CCP. And, you know, I explained at the beginning of this video that the Chinese actually, you know, they have a humongous set of ruling elites that are actually, they have the most billionaires in the world. Mainland China alone has 698 billionaires, and then when you add Hong Kong, 71 billionaires, which Hong Kong is part of China. It's just a slightly autonomous, you know, area of China. But you add their 71 to the 698, and you get 769 billionaires. We only have 724. They have 769. They have more billionaires than we do. They have the biggest middle class in the world. They have the biggest industrial base, the most gold holdings, the biggest military industrial complex on the face of the earth by far. They're humongous, man. They consist of 35% of the world's manufacturing. They have the biggest armed forces conventionally. They have the one of the most advanced nuke arsenals now that they have fractional orbital bombardment systems, which we don't have. Russia might have that, but China definitely has it, and they've tested it and perfected it. They have hypersonics that can cloak their missiles. They've mastered robotics. They can make miniature stars. They've got particle colliders. They've mastered directed energy. They've got all this stuff, man. They're very powerful. They've got their own power base. They're not part of the West whatsoever at all. Neither is Russia. You know, the Eastern Bloc is competing with the Western Economic Forum. The BRICS are in direct competition to the West. They're very different. They have different things. You know, in the West, they've sissified and wokeified everything. Well, they're not doing that in the East at all. They're not doing that in the East whatsoever at all. They're very different. Yeah, well, no, China has their own powers that be. China's CCP is their elites. That's their powers that be. And you know, the Russian political oligarchy is their powers that be. They're the Eastern elites. They have just as many elites in the East as there are in the West, but they're different. They have different goals and agendas. The Western elites don't control everything. That's what I was telling people earlier, Jeremy. They don't control everything. That's actually not correct at all. That's a really simple way of looking at it. There's a lot more dynamics going on than people even understand. I've researched all this for a very long time. You know, there's two different sets of elites, very different. There's a lot of power dynamics in play, a lot of different people involved with different ideologies. There's even subsets of elites. Like in the West, there's even subsets of the Western elites that have rival ideas and agendas for things, you know, that aren't even fully aligning with each other. There's even subsets in the East, you know, because you have different elites in different Eastern nations that have rival ideas. You know, not humongous differences, but they're like slight subsets. There are so much more to it than what people think or see on the surface. You know, there's the powers that be are no. I have, Jeremy. I have. It's nothing like that. They're not part of these organizations unless they're subverting them. They hate them. The CCP is their own thing, man. They're not part of the West. They're not controlled by the West. They control themselves. They're not part of the West whatsoever at all. They've cooperated with the West. It's like when two mafia families sit down and they'll have business dealings with one another, but they'll also go to war with each other and they'll conspire against each other, even if they will have sit downs. It's the same concept, man. You see, it's no different. You see, the Eastern elites have subverted Western institutions and have weaponized them against us, and they're going to humiliate these Western elites. They hate the West. They portray us all as bankers and snakes. They hate us. They have totally conspired against us. They've stolen from us to build themselves up. They're not with all this globalist stuff. They're not with it, man. They're not. They want to make a Chinese-dominated world. They do. They're trying to take over the world. They've done it very, very, stealthy through their Belt and Road Initiative. That's one way that they've, gone in and taken over other countries with stealth and cunning and subversion. They've also subverted us a lot. They've subverted our institutions, weaponized many of them against our own people, and it's horrible, man. See, they're doing, it's all part of their fourth generation warfare doctrines, their hybrid war doctrines, where they have a setup period where what they do is they shape the battlefield by going into another nation, and they take over the institutions little by little or buy out properties so that they can put their military in there in stealth, in secret. They can have CCP properties where they hide their vehicles. They have their vehicles trucked in from their Chinese-owned ports, with Chinese-friendly drivers that have CDLs, and they truck their vehicles in under the cover of night. They truck them into these CCP farms and warehouses and other properties that they've purchased after paying off our leaders, which allows them to look the other way while they go in and base their military units here. They've done it over the past 20 years. And then they're going to use their military side of their fourth step in their military setup is the actual invasion itself. There's 4 steps to fourth generation warfare. First, they buy out the leaders. Then they purchase the property. Then they base their troops. And then the 4th step is they invade. And they have their allies. The Russians are going to help, and so are the others. There's not going to be a Western Great Reset. There's never going to be a Great Reset. It's going to fail. The West and the CFR, I don't care about them. They don't control everything. That's not true. CCP is their own thing, and the Russians are too. They're not part of those. Now, Alibaba, even become president of Alibaba, the Chi-Com equivalent of Amazon in China, you have to kiss the ring of Xi Jinping. He's like their little G God man over there. They worship him. He's like their emperor for life. They're a secular humanist police state regime, and Xi Jinping is their little G God that they worship, See, people in the West think like the Western elites run everything, and that's not even true. If that was true, we would already be under the one world order. It's not the case. The one world order is going to be an Eastern-dominated one world order because the West is going to be destroyed, and it's also in the Bible, Mystery Babylon. The chief Western nation is going to be destroyed, which we are. So China and Russia are going to invade us. They're going to destroy us. They're going to colonize us. And then there's going to be an Eastern-dominated UN. It's going to be like a new UN. There's going to be a new UN that they're going to create out of this BRICS thing. And there are going to be 10 Eastern kings who are the 10 victorious kings from World War III that give their power to the beast for 1 hour, like it says in Revelation, and they're going to reign with the beast for 1 hour, which in biblical time isn't very long. We're talking like a matter of months, if that. But that's very biblical. There's going to be a third world war. They're going to destroy Mystery Babylon. They're going to invade us. They're going to win, and then they're going to give their power to the beast because he's going to say, well, this horrible war happened. Give all your power to me, and I'll fix everything. This was horrible. We should never have a world war like this again. I mean, it'll be something to that effect. And then they're going to unify, and they're going to make a new UN. There's going to be new everything. There's going to be massive paradigm shifts, and a lot of people aren't going to see it coming. A lot of people aren't going to see it coming. They've tried to convince people that these, Western elites run everything and they rule the whole world and blah, blah. That's not true. It's not true. There's different sets of elites, and there's even subsets in different, in the Western and Eastern sets of elites. There's a lot of dynamics going on. They're not all a unified front. Don't ever believe that. That's a crock of BS. There's a lot if you really look under the surface, if you look beyond just like the what the peons think that things are, because from our level everything looks like there's some sort of unified front. It's not even really the case. There's a lot of backstabbing and conniving because there's a lot of people that lust for power and more power, and enough is never enough for them, so that they're always backstabbing their way to the top. And that includes, once you get to like the, way top levels of like the Eastern elites, like Xi Jinping or Putin, they're never happy with that. They want more. Putin wants his part of North America. He wants Alaska back. They've even said so. They want Alaska back. They want the northern Canadian. They want to rule the Arctic and make that a Russian lake. And the Chinese want to take over, and they've said so out of their own speeches and their Politburos, that they want to colonize the lower 48. And they'll take lower Canada, too. They want all the food production to feed all their people, and they will. They're going to get the resources, of course, too. But, Russia, if they take the Arctic, that's enough resources to power Russia a full millennium. Like there's so many mineral resources and hydrocarbons, just all the stuff that's up there, the energy and mineral wealth that's in the Arctic Circle region. Man, they would be able to power Russia forever. I mean, for a long ass time. I mean, and the Chinese, if they have like all the farmland of lower Canada and the lower 48, man, they could feed all their people. They would be food independent. That's what they really want at the end of the day, to be food independent. So, that'll be a Sino-Russian New World Order. They're going to be the two strongest of the of the 10 Eastern kings that Revelation talks about, the 10 kings. They're going to be the two strongest ones. China's the world's superpower. They're the ones with the real power. Well, we've neutered and castrated our power base. Our military is a joke now. They've hollowed it out and purged it and wokeified it and barely trained. I mean, it's a joke, man. It's tiny. It's puny. China's got all this new technology. They've mastered all this stuff. They're the true world superpower in real terms, while we've languished and just become a joke. Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics in play. I mean, a lot of different things. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. Sylvia, you're right. They are independent. They have no alignment. Like, they've got their own set of elites. Like, they're doing their own thing. Like, they got the BRICS. That's a direct competitor of the WEF, of the Western Economic Forum. I've deeply studied this stuff. I know there's a lot of dynamics in play. They're not all a unified front. Sure, they have interactions with each other, but that doesn't mean they're all in bed together. They just cooperate on certain overall objectives if it benefits them. Like when China cozied up to us just so they could steal everything from us. That was to build themselves up. They don't care about globalism. They only cared about globalism to get all this industrial help and all these new factories built. Because it benefited them. Of course it looks like they're in bed with us. I mean, of course. But no, China hates us, dude. They hate us, man. The first chance, they're going to destroy us and colonize us. But of course China pretended to cooperate. But not everything is what it seems. People only look at the surface. They never look deeper. There's a lot of conniving and backstabbing that happens, and people don't even pay attention to it, man. They don't want to see it. It's like they're just satisfied with like just the basics, Yeah, they're very different. The East and the West are very different. Very different. Yeah. I post cringe. Well, I mean, to an extent, but you got to understand, in the Bible, though, when the beast comes on the scene after the West is destroyed, you know that the Western elites are controlled by Tel Aviv, yeah. But the Eastern elites are about to destroy Israel, which is why the beast has to come and make a covenant, remember? Because the beast, why would he need to make a covenant with them and save them from something if there was nothing to save them from? Like, the 10 kings that give their power to the beast and reign with him, he plays both sides. That's the only thing that makes sense for that to even happen. Because the 10 kings, he says, well, I'm going to, because he gets them to agree to give their power to him, and in exchange, he goes into Israel, and he says, hey, worship me or do whatever, and I'll keep you safe from these 10 kings who actually, gave their power to him. He plays off both sides in order to get Israel, to be their protector, to keep the 10 kings from invading them, because if you remember in the Bible, they're about to destroy Israel, but then he goes and makes a covenant with them. That's, because the West is destroyed, and the West was their protector, because Israel can't really protect themselves. The United States protected them forever. And of course, Western Europe would stand in for them too, along with the USA, just to boot. But, if the West is destroyed and Mystery Babylon's annihilated and the West is under Chinese and Russian occupation, then who is there to protect Israel when the 10 kings are about to go into them and take them over? Nobody. That's why the beast has to go in there, and he has to make a covenant, a peace treaty between Israel he'll make a covenant with many, with Israel and the 10 kings. Think about it. That's the only logical, rational thing that makes sense for that. Because the West has to be out of the picture for that to even happen, because the West is the ones that protect Israel. I mean, you're right about that, I cringe. Tel Aviv, they do control the West. They don't control the East, but they control the West. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So with the West gone, the beast has to be the protector of Israel from the Eastern 10 kings, from the BRICS, from whatever you want to call them, the new UN, whatever. They have to be protected from the 10 kings. That's why he makes a covenant with them, to keep that. Then he breaks the covenant. He breaks the covenant halfway through the week. That's when things get real bad. Yep. Let's see what's being said here. But yeah, I'm glad you said that, I post cringe. Yeah, you are right. They do control the West. I agree with that. What's that, Sylvia? Well, that's weird. I don't know what you mean by that. What happened? You have to tell me more. What happened? You saw little men. I don't understand. Coming out of the side of the mountain. What do you mean, Sylvia? I don't know what you mean. They were, okay, like they were like people. Okay, I was like, little men. I was like, what does she mean? She mean like, what, like weird creatures or no, but like little people. Okay, I get you. I understand. Well, like just like short men, like Asian dudes? Could be Chi-Coms, maybe. They've been found in our mountains before. The Russians and the Chi-Coms have been found in our mountains before, doing strange things. Have you ever heard about the stories outside of Gatlinburg, Tennessee? It was back in 2014? People found Russian troops in uniform and they were forced out of the area by them at gunpoint. Did you ever hear that? Yeah, there's foreign troops in our country. I mean, they have been for a while, but I heard that Gatlinburg story before. I believe it. Yeah, they were encountered. There were people hiking, and they encountered Russian troops in uniform, and the Russian troops pointed guns at them and told them to leave. Oh yeah, I'm sure, Sylvia. Hiding place, yeah. They've got hiding places everywhere. They got all the CCP properties, and they've got places in the mountains too. I'm sure camps and everything. Yep. Yeah, our nation's totally subverted and infiltrated by the Chinese and Russians. It's horrible. They're going to take us down so quick. Oh, no, you're good, Sylvia. You're good. I've been going a long time for this show. Normally I do my shows in the evening, but, this one, I tried to be more interactive with people, so I did this one early because, I didn't want to be asleep this evening and not do it. My sleep habit's all out of whack. I've been, I got up late yesterday afternoon, and then, I've just been up, and I was like, oh man, I better do my show, or else I'm not even going to have a Friday show. So, I decided to do it at 7 a.m. this time instead of 7 p.m. It'll at least be up for the, it'll at least be up for a replay value for those who want to watch the replay. It's pretty long though. I didn't know I was going this long. The Solutrians. Oh, hey, what's up, Marcus? How you doing, man? Yeah, I'm trying to be more interactive with people. This has been a pretty long show. Yeah, I hope you're doing good, man. I'll probably get off here soon. I've been going a long time, everybody. I hope people will actually watch this on the replay. It's pretty long, pretty long. But yeah, well, you all have a blessed day today, man. I guess I'm gonna go ahead and get off here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jeremy and Hannah and I post cringe uh and who else? Sylvia and Marcus. Thank you, and Boris and everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all be blessed, man.